We're living in a time of great change in our world, in our economy, in science and medicine. Yet some things endure: courage and compassion, reverence and integrity, respect for differences of faith and race. The values we try to live by never change. We now move forward with confidence and faith. Our nation is strong and steadfast. The cause we serve is right, because it is the cause of all mankind.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of the George W. Bush Presidential Center, Ken Hirsch.
Good morning. Freedom, opportunity, accountability, and compassion. These are the foundational values that define the public service of President and Mrs. Bush, and these are the values that drive everything that we do here at the Bush Center. We're here today at our annual Forum on Leadership to celebrate and recognize leadership and to challenge ourselves about what leadership means to each of us. Today we have an issue. The lack of trust in our democratic institutions threatens the very fabric of our society. Too many question authority, regardless of veracity. Too many clench their fists before thinking. Too many focus on the self rather than the other. And too many seek division rather than unity. On the surface, our institutions seemed ill-equipped to handle such division. They were designed by visionary, bold, yet flawed men who designed something that was both brilliant and peculiar. It was designed to frustrate us with checks and balances, frequent elections, tensions between federal and state authority, and a Bill of Rights to prevent any single person or the tyrannical majority from leading us astray. Thankfully, they also designed a system that was a living framework, able to adjust, change, and heal. It was precisely because we were flawed that the founders went to such great lengths to frustrate us. If men were angels, no government would be necessary, wrote James Madison in Federalist 51. But our 250-year-old policy experiment ebbs and flows with the times. And the miracle of the U.S. is that we can work out our differences, usually in a civil manner, and take out our frustrations at the ballot box. It's messy, but we usually get there. It is said that Americans will do the right thing after we've tried everything else. The problem comes when it is perceived that the institutions themselves stop serving the people, and then frustration boils over. Clearly, the Civil War is the ultimate example, but over the decades and recently, frustration has boiled over as well. Civil unrest occurs when one side feels that not only are their concerns unaddressed, but that they're unaddressable by the system. And agree or not, it's that quest to be heard that drives a lot of behavior. When people act out when they feel they have no other recourse. John Lewis called it getting into good trouble. Our afternoon speaker, Secretary Jim Mattis, calls it nurturing your maverick thinkers. President and Mrs. Bush called it raising Jenna. Historically, these outbreaks were unusual and uncommon occurrences. Today, however, the lack of civility seems to put us on the brink of an outbreak with just about every issue. With a political process that has been captured by the extremes, topics get framed as zero-sum battles. You can see why the stakes seem so high and losing seems so untenable. Then civility can go out the window. So why does it happen? Are the institutions themselves flawed? Or is it the lack of principled leadership of these institutions? Our durable institutions have lasted over almost 250 years, so I doubt it's the framework itself. The real issue may lie with us. We should accept our imperfections, and come together with patience, and by all means, a little humility. In doing so, our politicians will follow our lead. President Bush challenged us in his first inaugural when he said we must live up to the calling we share. Civility is not a tactic or a sentiment, he said. It is the determined choice of trust over cynicism, of community over chaos. Healing must start with this leadership. Throughout our history, when the institutions have failed, usually we could point to ineffective leadership that caused it. Now, there are two types of leadership that we've come to know. One is defined by geography, and the other is defined by the times. Institutional leadership, positions derived by the geography, sitting atop an org chart, standing at a podium, sitting at the head of a table. These derive authority from norms and charters, and these posts are temporary with power that is borrowed until terms expire, people change over, or replacements are named. The second form of leadership can come from anywhere. This is consequential leadership. Rosa Parks led from the seat of a bus. The passengers on Flight 93 led from the aisle when they shouted, "Let's roll," and took the ultimate sacrifice. But there are times when these leaderships converge. Abraham Lincoln presided over a country divided by our original sin and proclaimed that our nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Martin Luther King's pulpit galvanized a movement, and his words, "I have a dream," still have meaning and are distinctly his. Similarly, when a familiar president stood with a bullhorn on smoldering rubble and said, "I can hear you," a nation responded. "I need ammunition, not a ride," is emblematic of President Zelensky's being a leader who understands the significance of his moment as he stands on an ever-growing pile of rubble defending democracy at ground zeros all over Ukraine. We have now reached the moment where consequential leadership and our leaders need to answer the call. This means calling to support and strengthen our institutions, not storm them or tear them down. Plus, it's a time to remind ourselves of our own responsibility. The 18th century British statesman Edmund Burke taught us, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Why is it so important? First, what happens over there matters here. 9/11 taught us that. Second, what happens here informs matters over there. And today's division teaches us that. With our dysfunction and division here at home, we've lost the moral ground that younger democracies look to for courage and hope that they are on the right track. We should be the example for the world's democracies. We must get our act together so we can project confidence and inspire them. And we should recognize that we do a lot that is right and good, which serves to advance and not destroy humanity. This is our charge here at the Bush Center, to pursue with honor, civility, and humility the values of freedom and liberty. That's why it's my honor to kick off the Bush Center's 2022 Forum on Leadership. This event is an important part of our mission to combine ideas and action to improve the lives of people at home and around the world by ensuring opportunity for everyone, strengthening our democracy, and advancing free societies. Special thanks to so many who have made this day possible, and of course, we wouldn't be here today without following the lead of President and Mrs. Bush, whose public service has been defined by three things: their character, their love for this country, and their sense of optimism. Thank you both for your inspiration and the example that you lead for all of us. In his first inaugural, he called our story a story of a flawed and fallible people united across generations by grand and enduring ideals. And he went on to emphasize that our unity, our union, is the serious work of leaders and citizens in every generation. We are here to answer your charge and to do serious work with optimism to show America at its best. Now, to get us started, it is my pleasure to introduce one of my awe-inspiring colleagues, Ann Wicks, the Ann Kimball Johnson Director of Education and Opportunity at the Bush Institute. Please join me in welcoming Ann Wicks.
Good morning, everybody. Great to see you all here. As we were preparing for today's session, I was reminded of 3 conversations I'd had recently that all touched on the idea of opportunity. The first one was with a young woman named Mackenzie. She recently graduated from high school here in the Metroplex. And for all 4 years that she was in high school, she participated in the Career and Technical Ed program on her campus. It let her become a vet assistant, so she graduated with a certificate that said she knew what she was doing. She wants to be a veterinarian, and she got to go to work right away in a clinic, getting valuable experience and earning money. She needed to earn some money for college, and so that is supporting her now. She's at Tarleton State getting her degree. The second conversation I thought about was with an Amazon executive who was telling me about their $1.2 billion investment in paying for college tuition for 300,000 of their associates. That's about a third of their workforce. So those associates are their hourly employees, the folks in the warehouses, on the delivery trucks who are, bringing us the Amazon Prime boxes that pile up on our doorsteps. And this allows those folks, after 90 days of employment, to get tuition to pursue a 2 or 4-year degree. They don't have to wait to be reimbursed after they finish the program. The tuition is paid up front for them, which is a big deal in reducing a barrier to a college education. And the third conversation I thought about was with Dr. Michael Hinojosa. Some of you may know him if you're local. He is the superintendent here of Dallas ISD, and he was telling me about how in Dallas, they're assuming no longer is a high school diploma enough to get kids, young people, what they need to be successful in their next steps. So every graduate from Dallas will now leave with either advanced placement credits, AP credits, which will transfer into a 4-year institution, or they'll get a certificate like Mackenzie did, a way that will get them into a higher wage earning job immediately after graduation, or they will graduate with an associate's degree, a 2-year degree along with that high school diploma. So that is sort of a sea change for a school district to say the diploma is no longer enough. We need to do a little bit more. All that to me says we cannot leave access to opportunity up to chance or the proverbial bootstraps. We need to be really deliberate and thoughtful to make sure that all Americans have access to opportunity. If we believe in a strong American democracy, a strong American economy, we need folks who feel like they have real choice in their futures, that they can support themselves, their families, engage in their communities in all the ways that we think are meaningful. You'll see that same value echoed throughout the Bush Institute work, whether it's in our education team, how we are studying how academic outcomes impact wage data for young adults. You'll see it in our immigration policy. You'll see it in my colleague Cullum Clark, his work around what makes dynamic cities. You'll see it in our military service initiative as we work to help our veterans transition from their service to our country into higher ed, into a job. And next, you're going to get to hear from a leader who also shares that value. Mitch Daniels is the former governor of Indiana. He is the current president of Purdue University. I've been taught to wait because sometimes people yell something about Boilermakers when you say Purdue. Okay, one of my colleagues scared me the other day doing that. So the important thing to know about Purdue is that they have not raised tuition in 11 years. 11 years. That makes them enormously unusual, a true unicorn in higher ed. And so I read something that means they've saved Purdue students and their families about $1 billion in that time. There's been something like 6 classes that have gone through Purdue, never had a tuition increase. So I'm sure, as you can imagine, he's had some interesting faculty meetings along the way as he's challenged a lot of things about how higher ed should operate, what they should prioritize. And you'll get to learn a little bit more about that in his leadership. He'll be joined in that conversation by Holly Kuzmich. Holly is the executive director of the Bush Institute. She oversees the full range of policy and research work that we do here globally and domestically. She comes with some pretty serious policy chops herself, with service on the Hill, in the White House, and in the Federal Department of Education. And I have to say, we're very grateful to the Allstate Foundation for sponsoring today's conversation that lets us all be here together. So please join me in welcoming Mitch Daniels and Holly Kuzmich to the stage. Thank you.
All right, Mitch, welcome to the Bush Center.
Fire when ready.
Thank you for being here. Well, Ann just talked about Your public service, you have been the president of Purdue since 2013. You were the governor of Indiana, my home state, for 8 years. Prior to that, you headed the Office of Management and Budget for President Bush in the first term. But before that, you had a business career. So talk a little bit about your business career and how that has influenced your leadership.
Well, first, thanks for asking that question. And so many places I go, people sort of skip over the longest stretch of my working life because the other things are a bit more publicized.
Yeah.
But I've consistently said that the most valuable lessons I learned, and the ones most applicable to either of the last two jobs, for sure, were those I learned in business. I just know that the president must feel the same, and I think I heard him express that and demonstrate that on more than one occasion. So many things that you can't avoid in business. First of all, an emphasis on results. You know, a lot of folks in public life today, at least it appears, I think if they get out of a snappy sound bite or maybe these days it's a clever tweet, that they've done a good day's work. And, you know, in business, that won't do. Results are everything. I used to say to our folks, until a few years ago, I'd say, just remember, you know, don't worry about the criticism or setbacks and so forth. I said, remember, results are Trump. Well, then I have to find a different way to say that. But you know the point I was trying to make. And associated with that, you know, in business, the world measures you. You can't escape it. Your sales go up or down, your margin goes up or down, your stock price, if there is one, market share. And so I absolutely learned to try to transplant that into public life and now nonprofit life, where it doesn't come as naturally. I quoted so often the line I first heard doing business with Walmart, who used to say, if you're not keeping score, you're just practicing. And so you have to implant accountability in the absence of the profit motive. And so we measured everything in government, and we try to also at my current post. And I could give you other examples, but I think those are the most important lessons. You know, learning to try to get a large number of people to understand a common goal and get aligned and voluntarily, you hope enthusiastically, contributing to that goal would be another.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about your approach to doing that in your time as governor and in your time as president of Purdue. But I want to show a little video because I want people to understand that you really are sort of a man of the people. You've used that approach in running for governor and serving for governor and as president of Purdue. So let's roll this little clip real quickly.
Uh-oh.
We'll talk about this in a second.
Oh. We got some very clever engineers at Purdue University.
So tell people what that was and what you were doing in that video. And let me also say we're going to show a couple of other photos from your time campaigning and serving as governor where you stayed in people's homes across the state. So let's talk about this. You
mean the couch?
The couch. Talk about the couch first.
One day, this would have been in the spring of 21, one day a motorized couch is spotted winging through campus. And I don't mean just limping along. I mean, the thing does 20 miles an hour. It took a while for the student paper to track down the young men who built it. But as I say, we've got some very clever students at our school, and they took it's the couch you remember from either your first house or your dorm room, you know, burns and stains and everything. And they put it on a Meyer garden cart and with a go-kart engine. And took it off. You know, they loaned it to some friends who got apprehended by our campus police driving down Stadium Drive, and it's not really street legal. But anyway, when I saw that, I said, hey, I got to have a ride before those guys graduate, and they gave me one, and I was having dinner with them, and then we cooked up the idea that we had to have an outdoor commencement. We'd never had it. We honor every student individually. It takes 6 ceremonies to do it. But last year, COVID, we had to do that. And so to liven things up, we decided, hey, why don't we make a grand entrance?
So you arrived by couch cart.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, and then when you campaigned for governor, you had this habit of, instead of staying in a hotel, you would go stay in regular people's homes all over the state, and you did that as governor too.
125 times that we counted.
So these are some of the candid photos of you, visiting
Yeah.
with families.
Well, to be honest, it started with being cheap. And, I was a no-name first-time candidate. I hit the road for 16 months, and I did.
In an RV, manufactured in
Indiana-built RV, and there were a couple things involved. I mean, one was I had a strong feeling, and I had encouraged friends who had run for office. I didn't really expect I ever would, to try to return the personal contact to the process. One thing that I thought was conducive to was trying to build greater confidence. If people felt they actually did have some access, someone was listening. There's a sense sometimes of these days of distance and estrangement between regular folks and those making decisions. And then, in particular, just to be honest, it's less true now, but at the time, the Republican Party whose uniform I wore, was laboring under the stereotype, don't care, don't understand ordinary people, average folks, don't care about them. And I had told a lot of friends who had run, I said, don't whine about it, go prove it's not true. It's just a special burden. So go deal with it. So comes my turn, I decided to try to do that, and I'd like to think that we really did.
Yeah. Did you have some fun along the way?
Oh, huge fun. I mean, there's 26. They made 26 half-hour reality shows, which are just what they followed me around. Just whatever happened. We get lost. People don't know who I am. Killing flies. In the RV. Whatever happened, and it was just so valuable. A person that was a good ally of the president's, Lamar Alexander, I told him what I was planning to do. He said, that's a really good thing. He said, it'll probably make you a more successful candidate. It will definitely make you a better governor. And that was absolutely right. I could cite for you many issues I first learned about from just some person. I mean, literally, two single moms on a bar stool. I still remember in Clay City, Indiana, that's the first time I knew how poor a job the state was doing collecting child support. A judge would rule and then the system wouldn't go get the money for some deadbeat. Things like that.
Yeah.
And you get funny stories, funny things happen. I get lost running. I can't make the shower work, have to take a bath. I mean, just... Some of them were only funny in retrospect, like the dog that bit the living daylights out of my leg. I came up on my motorcycle, which was another part of all this, and he didn't like the noise and came up and just bit the living daylights out of my left leg. So, yeah, but it was, I wouldn't trade it, and if I ever take the time, there's a great book in there somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so in your time as governor, you led the state to its first balanced budget in 8 years. You transformed an $800 million deficit into a surplus of $370 million in a year. How did you go about approaching your role as governor?
Well, I'd like to think with purpose, the same sort of purpose I saw in the 43rd president, and a few other great figures that I've either known or read about. We tried, we never let a year go by without trying to do something big, and all 8 years. I used to say lame ducks, can still fly, and but in the first year, the first two tasks I thought were, first of all, just to do a good job of stewardship. The state was broke. It was stiffing schools and local governments. The way you paper it over is you just don't send them the money they're due until your cash comes in. Very bad practice. And so we campaigned on it. We said we would fix it. We passed the tightest budget in Indiana in 55 years at least, and got it back in shape. It took about a year and a half for revenues to catch up with a very tight spending level. The other big job was to begin the process of trying to make us an investment-friendly, business-friendly, jobs-friendly state, which was a process of, it took many years, but we started that right away also.
So I want to transition. I mean, there's a lot more we could talk about as your time as governor, but I want to talk a good amount about education, because you focused on that as governor and obviously in your current job. But I also want to talk about that commencement speech you gave when you came in on the couch cart last year. You talked about your concern that COVID has weakened our country's spirit of risk-taking.
The speech had, I would say, two themes, and that was certainly part of it. The main point I wanted to try to make to our graduates was that we expect Boilermakers, as they always have, to take up positions of real responsibility in society. And that the essence of any position of genuine responsibility, the very essence of leadership, is the setting of priorities, the reconciliation and the balancing of interests. And I suggested to them that only time will tell, but that I think that history will judge very harshly the way our society, at different people in different levels and roles, handled the pandemic. And way too many of them put on blinders, dealt with one goal and one goal only, hid behind so-called experts in so doing, the goal being nobody's supposed to get sick. And they either were blind or blinded themselves to the inevitable consequences of such a decision. And I thought that was a mistake. We attempted not to make that mistake at our school. A good example is that the data was very clear from early on that this particular virus, absolutely the inverse, by the way, of the 1918 flu, which was very deadly to young people, not so much to their elders. This virus, the reverse. And so with our population, average age barely over 30, and that includes the surrounding community right around us, it seemed to us that we had a duty, first of all, to our students not to interrupt their education if we could possibly avoid it, and that we ought to make that attempt, and we did. And so in the speech, I suggested that those who hid behind experts and were fixed on just one, very important, but just one of the concerns of society should have had, were not leading, they were abdicating. And that I quoted a great historian said the last extension of caution is cowardice. And I suggested to them that you're never going to have enough. This is a business lesson. You will never have enough data to be 100% certain. If by the time you are, somebody's beat you to the market, beat you to the customer, well, you've lost.
Yeah.
And so the point was that I tried to make was that I hope we don't lose the appetite for reasonable calculated risk that has helped this country to advance as it has. And there's some signs of that pre-COVID. Mobility from place to place and job to job. The number of startups has been declining. And the big one to me, people aren't having enough children, and that's the biggest risk on the future you can take.
So Ann mentioned in your introduction that you've kept tuition and the cost overall flat at Purdue since your arrival. How'd you go about that? Because most colleges and universities in this country are not doing that.
Well, you won't be surprised that we've been asked the question a few times.
Yeah.
No, it's true. We have held the cost of tuition for all students, not just in-state, constant. We also found ways, we did have the most expensive room and board in the Big Ten. It's now the least expensive. It's down about 3%, while others have risen. So it's less expensive in unadjusted or nominal dollars to come to our school now than it was in 2012. And I guess the short answer, I sometimes say we solved the equation for zero, which is a glib way of saying that we simply decided this is important. We're a public university. We're a land-grant school. And I think any school, frankly, these days should take it as a duty to try to keep itself affordable and accessible to students of all income levels. So what started as a one-year gesture, I had no idea we could even do it a second year, has become really a way of doing business in which we start by saying, all right, if we can hold tuition where it is and make investments in our future as needed and raise the pay of our competitively or better as we do for our people, et cetera. If we can do that and break even or better, which we have every year, why would you raise tuition? And you know, if you can get people aligned around a goal and everybody contributing in ways big or small, you can be amazed what happens.
So are you worried about the day you might have to raise tuition after this streak you now have going?
Well, it'd be, people will take note, but I don't think we can feel embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
You know, sooner or later, you know, it'll happen.
How do you keep quality? I mean, a lot of times people worry that when they keep costs down that the quality's gonna...
Such an important question. The goal was never and can't be price alone. It's value. Value is quality over price. And we will never, I don't think it can be said that we have in any way stinted or failed to take steps that might enhance the quality of a Purdue education. And by every measure I think that we can find, it's stronger today. The student body is the highest, even though it's grown dramatically. By the way, one way we've been able to stay where we were price-wise was that and it's not unrelated, we've grown substantially as a school. We're 30% bigger at the undergrad level and 43% bigger at the graduate school level. And, you know, a strong top line enables a lot of investment and other good things.
So, you know, you get asked about that question. You mentioned a lot. Do your fellow public university heads sort of take your advice to heart? Why or why not?
Well, you know the answer to that. You know, we've tried, whether it's this or a number of other things we've done that were our departures or you know, new experiments. Always try to be careful to say we are not preaching to anyone. We are not recommending anything that we have done at Purdue. Might not necessarily be right. Thank goodness we have an incredibly diverse array of higher education institutions in this country. We want it that way, and so what's right for us may not fit elsewhere. No, I'm probably not the, you know, going to get elected president of the fraternity.
So two of the innovative things you've done as president of Purdue, you created charter high schools in the state, polytechnic high schools. Talk about why you went about doing that.
Same reason that the 43rd president jumped right on the issue of educational improvement, enhancement, and opportunity, particularly for those being left behind. For several years, we worked very hard to try to increase the number of low-income, first-generation, and minority students at our school. It's very, very hard to do. Everybody's trying, and therefore competing for what is, certainly in our state and really nationally, a tragically small number of college-ready young people in that category. So I finally decided that, you know, if we keep waiting on the public school system of our state or other states to produce enough such students for us to meet our goals, we'll wait past my day. So we started high schools. They're called Purdue Polytechnic High Schools. There are two in the inner city of Indianapolis. There's now one in South Bend, Indiana, in the northern part of our state. If it works well, I imagine one day a network at least in all the metro areas. And although you wouldn't find the numbers impressive, 40 versus 15. Last year we graduated the first class of the first school, so it was 4 years old. You build them that way. And we were successful in recruiting 40 inner city kids from Indianapolis. You say, well, 40. The average for the 6 years from the inception of the idea to that graduation, the average for the entire school district was 15. So it's progress. And this week I saw that we've got 36 acceptances so far from our 3 schools. So we're building our own pipeline, because if these young people are going to have the kind of opportunity that they deserve, something unusual had to be done.
Yeah. Something else you did about 4 years ago, you purchased Kaplan University, an online university, and turned it into Purdue Global. That was not without a lot of faculty concern, Talk a little bit about why you did that
Yeah. Well,
and what you heard when you did it.
well, first of all, we bought them for $1. I was holding out for 50 cents, but in business, there's got to be puts and takes, so we settled. No, it's $1 with what you would sort of call a workout provision. And they are our vendor now for certain functions. The short of this is that, and by the way, I think I heard Ann speak to this very point while we were waiting. Many people have not noticed, and I believe the single biggest opportunity and frankly assignment we have in terms of lifting the educational standards of this country up really isn't the 18 million students who are on the SMU campus, the Purdue campus, and the ones we talk about all the time. It's the number's twice that big, 36.7 million people who started college and didn't finish. I'm not even dealing with high school, or those who stopped at high school or less. Think about that. These are people who spent money, probably borrowed money, and didn't wind up with a credential that it probably didn't do them, the time they spent didn't do them much good. So Purdue Global is currently teaching 33,000 of such students. It's a completely different universe. Again, we're a land-grant school created by Abe Lincoln and his allies to democratize education as it existed at the time when 2% basically white males went. And so to me, this is just the next concentric ring of that assignment. We can't be we can't honor our responsibility as a public university if we stop at age 24 or very smart grad students. And that's what Purdue Global is about. The typical student at Purdue Global is a 33-year-old single mom who's juggling work, family, who knows. And it's all online. I'll tell you, we gave this free to Purdue staff. And I've had some of the most heartwarming encounters and messages from some of our people on the support staff who've gotten now a degree they thought they'd never get, and that's what that's about. And it's really anybody working on that assignment is doing something good for the country, we think.
Yeah. Okay, it's not been an easy time to be a university leader. There's issues of free speech and cancel culture. You've really sort of taken a very proactive role in addressing this with your student body. How have you done that?
Well, first of all, what's been going on in higher ed in that regard is, yes, it's shameful and distressing, but it's also an incredible abdication of a different sort. The idea of free speech, the free expression, people should be free to say what they think, believe what they think, not be preached to, is, yes, so it's living up to the First Amendment and so forth. But in the higher ed context, it's more than that. It strikes, failing to protect those rights, strikes at the very heart of what we're supposed to be there for, which is the advancement of knowledge and its transmission to younger people. Knowledge stops advancing when everybody thinks the same thing. Knowledge always advances through the collision of ideas. The scientific heretic who turns out to be right is the person that we really look back to, the Galileos of history. And so what's unacceptable just in your school board or town council, which is to say, monolithic thinking and silencing of dissent, is absolutely a default of our fundamental responsibility in higher ed. So what have we done? In August, when our freshman class arrives, the first module they'll hear in their 3 or 4 day orientation is about free speech. There's role playing involving students and faculty. If somebody says something you disagree with, here's how you contest bad speech with better speech, as opposed to trying to silence or bully somebody into submission. Starting with this year's freshmen, every Purdue student will have to pass a civics certification before they graduate. Just another attempt to try to make certain people have a minimal sense of our institutions not just how they work, but why they are set up that way. Why are powers separated? Why is there a federal system as opposed to a totally central government and so forth? So that's our point of view, and I will say, much like the tuition policy, on a campus where, thank goodness, people disagree about almost everything, there's pretty strong agreement about these things. That we don't get people arguing that certain speakers shouldn't be allowed on campus and so forth.
People are just nicer in Indiana.
Well, they are, but Texas too.
Yeah, yeah. When you were governor, you passed one of the more robust school choice programs in this country, and it still exists today, which a lot of states have tried this over the years. There's some renewed interest in these kinds of programs post-COVID. How'd you get that through, and what have you seen in the years since it's been in place? What has it done for the state?
We worked on education reform every year, but we had an adverse or half-adverse legislature half the time, so we had to work on things piece by piece. But then we had an enormous win in 2010. We had very strong majorities, and we shot the moon on those elements of education reform that we had not already succeeded in passing. And yes, along with the best charter school law, people say in America, reform of collective bargaining, the scholarship, or people say voucher program, which is not only still there, it's grown substantially. They've raised the income limits. Basically now, we also have full public school choice, which came about a different way. I won't take the audience's time with, but any student in Indiana now can go to any school basically they want. They can switch public schools, they can probably find a charter school, and they certainly have access to the vouchers up to a income level where the families can probably pay for it anyway. And there's a lot of good arguments for free choice. First of all, just people should be free to choose their own health care, education, make these decisions for themselves. Yes, choice in education does make the rest of the system better. Competition always does. But to me, to use, I think, a badly overused and misused term, this is a social justice issue. If whatever social justice means or doesn't, it must mean that a low-income family should have the same right to choose a school, a safe, which is usually the first thing they're looking for, and high-quality school for their child, the same choice that their wealthier neighbor has. And that's what it's always been about for me, and that's why it's been a pleasure to see it grow.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to end with two questions. First of all, you've been at this higher ed thing for 9 years now, right?
Higher ed thing, yeah. That's what I call it.
What keeps you going? Like, what gets you excited about higher ed and the students you serve? And
well, I'm very fortunate that our school, and this predates me a long time, I kind of knew it before I got there. Green as I was, I knew that Purdue was a special sort of place. Our students are so purposeful. They study harder. We know this. We measure this. And it's a joy to watch them work to improve themselves and leave us and go do great things. I like the fact that our particular university is, I always tell my friends in Indiana, or their legislature, for instance, if Indiana didn't have a Purdue University, you'll all be trying to invent one. I'm talking about a high technology, STEM-based school in a knowledge economy. We are generating, we graduate more STEM graduates in absolute numbers than any school in the country. That's a gratifying thing to be part of. And plus, we are becoming, Purdue and the university, institutionally, an economic engine. We had 2 years ago, we had the fastest growing per capita income in the country, in our county. And so we are working to, bring high-tech businesses and jobs to the edge of our campus where they can access our students, access our faculty, and improve our state. So that's a pretty fun thing to work on.
And what's been the most surprising or unexpected thing about being a college president?
The food. You can't believe how good the food is these kids are eating. You know, I eat in the dining courts and places, you know, different places, especially the dining courts all the time. And, you know, it just took me so long to get adjusted to. There's 22 choices. You know, you want the stir fry, you want the make your own pizza, you want the, you know, the Korean barbecue, you know. And I'm thinking, you know, I told all these kids, I said, college food is supposed to be all the same and terrible. You have no idea how good you're eating here, but that's the terms of competition today.
Well, Mitch Daniels, thank you for being here, and thank you for your leadership to this country.
Thank you.
Education changed my life. It transformed me. It gave me status. It gave me confidence. It gave me career. It helped me to support my family, to bring my family to another country, to be safe. And I knew that at that moment that what I should give to my people is education and health. In matter of 1 year, we had 25 schools set up, 15,000 children going to school. Education transforms people. When you educate people, they are going to be different. And today or ever, we need to work gender equality. We cannot only train women, but forget about the men, because the men should know the potential of women, know that how much potential this man has and how much these women can do the same job as they are doing. By having compassion and having love, you can conquer the world. And I tell you, we could. And if we could do it in Afghanistan, I am sure 100% that everyone can do any part of the world. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Laura Bush.
Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to present the George W. Bush Institute Citation to a long-standing member of the U.S. Afghan Women's Council, the mother of Afghanistan, Dr. Sakina Yacoubi. After receiving a bachelor's and a master's degree in the United States, Dr. Yacoubi followed her heart back to her homeland with the hope of giving women and girls what she had, access to education. She began her work as an educator in a crowded Afghan refugee camp in Pakistan. She lived in these camps for 7 years. Amidst the hopelessness, poverty, and abuse that she saw there, she discovered that the most direct way to improve the lives of Afghan women and children was to first earn their trust and then give them an access to education. So Dr. Yacoubi established the Afghan Institute of Learning, or AIL. After the Taliban closed girls' schools in the 1990s, AIL supported 80 underground home schools for 3,000 girls in Afghanistan. Now, under Dr. Yacoubi's leadership, AIL supports women and children through its teacher training programs, learning centers, and health clinics. Over the past 25 years, Dr. Yacoubi, with the Afghan Institute of Learning, has trained nearly 30,000 teachers. They've taught over 500,000 students, and they've seen over 3 million patients in their health clinics. Dr. Yacoubi's message is clear. All Afghan citizens, men and women, deserve the right to an education. All Afghans must be included, and they must be respected within society. Today, even with the extreme challenges and humanitarian crisis we see in Afghanistan, Dr. Yacoubi remains committed to her work. Just a few weeks ago, secondary school-age girls in Afghanistan marched back to school for the first time in months. I can imagine their excitement and the promise they felt as they packed their backpacks and carried their books to their desk. and I can imagine the devastation and heartbreak when the Taliban changed its mind and sent them home the same day, ruthlessly reversing their pledge to open schools for girls above the 6th grade. Thankfully, the Afghan Institute of Learning has maintained their schools, and they are open. These are separate teaching spaces for boys and girls, and for girls that have reached the 6th grade. There are approved education programs for them in community-based organizations. The AIL health clinics are now treating women struggling with new conditions: acute hunger, malnutrition, stress, fatigue, and lack of access to clean water and adequate shelter. AIL has also provided vaccines to nearly 1,200 women and children. They know that healthy moms raise healthy children, and healthy kids are kids who can learn. Dr. Yaqubi's leadership of the Afghan Institute of Learning is as important as ever. She believes, like we do here at the Bush Institute, that every child in Afghanistan deserves an education, and that every person in Afghanistan deserves access to quality health care and the right to earn a living. One of the founding principles of the Bush Institute is that what happens in countries far away matters here in the United States. After September 11th, when the spotlight turned on Afghanistan, Americans saw the brutal treatment of women and girls by the Taliban. And we saw the importance of brave and courageous women like Dr. Yaqubi, who risked her life to make a safer Afghanistan, and therefore a more peaceful and secure world. As we present this honor to Dr. Yaqubi, we reaffirm our promise that we'll never forget the people of Afghanistan. We'll remain hopeful, and we won't look away as Afghanistan fights for peace, stability, and freedom. Thank you, Dr. Yaqubi. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you especially for your sincere and loyal devotion to Afghanistan. You're a shining example around the world, and I'm honored to recognize your leadership with this citation today. Dr. Yaqubi.
Congratulations, Dr. Yaqubi. I know to start our conversation, you wanted to offer a few words of thanks.
Thank you, Natalie. First of all, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. First of all, it's a great honor to be here, and I would like to thank Mrs. Laura Bush, the First Lady of United States. I am so proud to be here in your presence, and I am so honored to be invited by you and Mr. Bush to be here and to talk about Afghanistan, because I know where is your heart, where have been your heart. Both of you have been dedicated your life for the women and children of Afghanistan from the beginning. I never forget when you came to Afghanistan, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all your leadership, because you, as a librarian, as a teacher, as a mother, with love that you had, you proved to the world that a woman with those kind of a skill can be a leader. And that is a model for the women of Afghanistan that we are following. Thank you very, very much.
Dr. Yacoubi, I think the feeling is very mutual. We are so proud to have you here today for Forum on Leadership. As you know better than anyone, education has been one of the most transformative influences in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. You've been at this a very long time, for decades, and I think to start the conversation, it would be really helpful to give context to how impactful education has been over the last 2 decades, and why education matters even more today as we see a very complex struggle that includes a struggle between the educated and the uneducated in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for this wonderful question. First of all, I want to share with you, in a society when people are not educated, in a society when it's a tradition society, in a society which the woman doesn't count anything at all, in a society when people struggle for a bite of food to eat, in a society is constantly in conflict, you can imagine that without education, how they survive. It has been proven to the world that for the time that we start working on education issue for the last 20 years, the women of Afghanistan, the girls of Afghanistan have proven to the world that they are the brightest one and the smartest one. And once you give them a little floor or environment, a little facility, they just shine and they work so hard that it's below your mind. And why I want to share this with you, I share this with you from experience. 30 years of my life have been working around the people who were not educated, the people who did not know what education is all about. Today, the people of Afghanistan know what is education, have the taste of education, have been exposed to education. Today, they know media. They are watching around the world what's going on. Today, they are so different from the people that they were 40 years ago, from the people that they were 20 years ago, from the people they were 10 years ago. They are so different. Our young people, boys and girls, they love education. They give their time night and day, 24/7. They want to study. They want to learn. Believe me, in Afghan Institute of Learning, we have program around the clock. It means in different cycle, if different level, from literacy to high school to higher education, different courses, different language. They come and they go from one area to the next, one to the next. Sometimes you look, and sometimes I joke with them. I said, aren't you exhausted? Aren't you tired? They said, no, Ustad. They call me professor. No, Ustad. We want to. We love you because you have this program for us. And these are the kind of people. How could not education change life? I think education is an issue that has changed life, has transformed people. And when you are educated, you are change agents. You change the society. And that society toward a peaceful society, toward a prosperous society, and toward the society that people absorb equality, justice, and gender equality. That is the way education can change life to that kind of direction. And that's, we are all about education in Afghanistan. But today, again, is different. Yes, we had a very good system of education. Is that was enough? All the people of Afghanistan are educated? No, we reached so little. Yes, we trained 39,000 teachers in a really methodology that is student-centered technique, in a methodology that is today's methodology. Yes, we have educated and trained 14.5 million people in different levels. But is that enough? All those people are educated? No. Still, we have people who does not believe in education. Still, we have people who do not believe in women's education at all. Still, we have people who does not want their daughter or their wife to go to work or go to school. We have a long way to work. But unfortunately, today, we are hitting the zero ground again. And you all know about it. And you know what's going on in Afghanistan. So I don't have to tell you. But I tell you one thing, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart like a farmer. You plant a tree, and when your tree blossom and produce fruit, you are joyful to pick up those fruit. I want to share with you a lot of those beautiful flowers that I grow, a lot of those beautiful trees that we plant. They blossom. They start to give us the fruit, and they all have been shattered. Half of them have been shattered. Hundreds of them have been shattered and destroyed, and that's break my heart. Today I am by myself surprised that I am staying alive and I can talk, because as you all know, they call me the mother of education in Afghanistan, and I have that title. They are all my children. I love them dearly. And they had hopes. They have hopes and they want a future. They want brighter future. They are looking forward for their future. They want like everybody else. They are the same equal as anybody around the world. They need to be educated. They were looking forward for that education, and they are looking forward for that education. They want to build their country. They want to build a country that be a very advanced country. They are not satisfied with little things. Afghan people are not satisfied with little things. They want to go higher and higher, and they want the best that they could have. And that is right now their life is shattered, and their hopes is down. But we cannot allow that.
Well, and you haven't stopped, you know, and what's different this time is that they tasted education, they tasted freedom, they tasted equity, and so you have an entire generation that has felt that and has grown up with the hope of peace and prosperity. And I think the term unicorn was used earlier by my colleague Ann Wick. So Dr. Yakubi, you very much are a unicorn. You know, for most women and girls in Afghanistan right now, they do not have access to education above the 6th grade. Women cannot report to work. Women are being barred from clinics. They can't freely move within their communities, around their country, even to get outside of their country. But your schools, they're open. Your clinics are open. You've actually expanded on some of the work that you're doing, and I think it's a testament to just how agile, how thoughtful you are, how you have always met people where they are in the pursuit of better for your country. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about how things look right now for AIL and the great work that you continue to do.
First of all, Natalie, I would like to share this with the audience, with everyone in here. You create a program, you have objective, and that objective you reach that objective no matter what. If a government come or a government fall apart, or if there is a conflict, if there is a war, if you are focused on your objective, no matter what is the situation, you try to reach that objective. And that's happening to EIL. Fortunately, I have a wonderful people are working with me. I am so proud of my staff. Most of them are young people. They are working with me day and night, and be creative. You know, I'm a social entrepreneur. I'm a Shoka Fellow, and I'm Shoab Fellow. And you know that when you are an entrepreneur, constantly you think about something. And when the challenge comes, you think how I can shift it from this way to another way to get to my focus, to get to my point. And that happened. During the pandemic, you know, Afghanistan was hit just like any other country. And you know, we are poor. Economically, we are in trouble. So we saw that this is going to destroy the people, and how we are going to wait for people to bring things for us. And we start working, and we created the environment. We create a program that constantly were producing masks, sanitizer, things, and we announce through the radio and teach people how to really take care of themselves. But at the same time, when these things happen, the government falls. And right away, I know in my mind that what direction they are going to take and what direction we go. Automatically, we shifted our program. It was Quad. we shifted separate. We separate boys and separate girls from each other. That was first thing we do. The second thing, you know, we have Women Learning Center. And those Women Learning Center, the program is run by women, and they are mostly women. And they come for the literacy, they come for skill training, they come for health education, they come for different kind of issue. But once this happened, automatically my mind worked that right now, the school is closed. What can we do? We automatically set and created a curriculum, that the curriculum of a school from 7th grade to 12th grade be changed and shift to the Women Learning Center. As soon as we did that, you could not believe. Our Women's Center, if it has 400, become 1,000. If it has 1,000, it become 1,500. All the young women who were 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, they pour into the Women Learning Center, and we hire more teachers, and we continuously, still we are hiring. As a matter of fact, it is interesting to share with you that the people should know that we are not going to stop, because I'm sorry to say that the politicians are playing their issue or their game. We are there to do work and to reach our objective to educate our society. So as a matter of fact, we start expanding our program, not only in area of education, also in area of health. You know that health is a big issue, and it's related to education. If the mother is not healthy, they could not go work, they could not help their children. If the children is not healthy, they could not learn. So that has been an issue with us. Constantly we work on it. So we saw that 260 health clinic was closed because most of the foreigners ran away from the country, and all the clinic were closed. And so as a result, we said we have to do something. We had 8 clinics. So right away, they come and they request us to open clinic. And we said condition, under condition that we set up the condition. We want women doctor, we want women nurses, we want women vaccinator. And they said, whatever you do, just this clinic are empty, nobody is running, we don't have anything to do, you do what you want. And automatically, we took 3 clinics, we took 5 health centers, and it's full of staff, AOL staff them, and they are working. Because the mortality and morbidity rate is down 70% from 2 years ago. All of a sudden, because there is no service available for those people. So that's, again, we expand our program to make it bigger and give more service to the people. And that is we are trying to do. And we constantly are being creative, changing curriculum, shifting. And also, right now, as I share with Natalie, one thing that we are working on it, that is going to be for the first time in the history of Afghanistan, even for the history of the world. We are creating a curriculum that curriculum is going to be broadcast through our TV station. We have a TV station. I figured out that my goal was that educate every child in Afghanistan and go to every province of Afghanistan. There is 33 provinces in Afghanistan, 16 provinces AOL is working on it. We decided, okay, through the TV, we can broadcast a lesson plan that every child can sit in their home in front of TV and learn. And we hired the best teacher with the best methodology and education level that goes from 7th grade to 12th grade to university. And that is, we are working on it. And we've already made the logo, already we made the building. So we are about to open that in the next week, so that every child in their home, if they have a TV, they can sit in front of a TV and watch. Yes, you might ask that educational system, especially Mrs. Bush knows about that educational system will not that maybe the impact of all children being together in an environment that, yes, it's not ideal, but for me, it's something that they continuously learn until the situation is ready for them. I do not want them to stop and I do not want them to be hopeless. I want every child in every province, and our TV station is international. They can watch this from the refugee camp in Tajikistan, in Turkey, and Iran, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, every province they can sit and watch that program. And I am very proud of my staff. They work with me night and day, and we develop that curriculum, and we are broadcasting through our
And again, you're meeting people where they are. And you've done that throughout your work, right? You've had mobile education platforms. You've always thought about how you meet people where they are. And so many people describe the current situation in Afghanistan as impossible, that at times it's like throwing pebbles into the ocean. But in a very impossible situation, I think a lot of us who know advocates like yourself and so many other Afghans realize that as hard as it is, truly nothing is impossible. And you joked the other night you were up late designing the logo for your video education program. So we have a room full of individuals who are obviously very concerned with what is going on in Afghanistan. We have people streaming in across the US and around the world. How can we join you? What do you need? How can we show our solidarity and support? Words are important, but what and how can all of us do to help advocates like yourself continue to be a point of light amid the darkness?
Thank you for asking this. First of all, I want to tell you that Afghanistan is politically, economically, and socially in trouble. Afghanistan is in crisis. We have 25 million people are starving in Afghanistan right now. There is no job. There is no opportunity, there is no money. This has been hit from previous government. This is, Afghanistan has nothing. The poor people has nothing. They don't have job, they don't have opportunity. That is one thing. Children, 5 million children, according to the UN, they are malnourished. They are dying. Another thing that people, you bring the children like a commodity. When you have a bazaar, you bring a lot of your commodity to sell. Today in Afghanistan, there is a police. All these men come and they bring their children. That breaks my heart and breaks your heart. Police yourself as an individual, your child. You love that child. It is your blood. It is part of your body. It's coming to the market and telling people, I will sell my 6-month-old baby or my 2-year-old child or my 5-year-old child for $1,000 or $2,000. How do you feel? And those people are being sold. And those people are being carried from our country to other country for different trafficking, whatever they are going to do with them. That's another issue. Another issue that a lot of our younger are being sold through early child marriage. They are 7 years old. They are 12 years old. They are being sold 5,000, 10,000 Afghani to another old man because the family needs to have the money to feed the rest of the family. So that is the situation in Afghanistan. Yes, we try to create jobs. AIL is trying to create jobs. Yes, we were not humanitarian organization. In the last 2 years, we provide thousands and thousands of dollars humanitarian assistance to people as dry food, liquid, all kinds of shelter, clothing, all kinds of things. But we are one organization. A lot of international organizations left Afghanistan. They are not there to assist. They are not giving assist. We need your help to help the money be released. If the money is blocked, right now the money is blocked, we could not send money through the banking system, which we did before. Now we are sending money through a hawala system, which is not efficient, which is risky, and we could not send a chunk of money. We only send maybe 10,000, 5,000, and that is for a program as such as our program. That is it's not one clinic salary even. So the point is that who is suffering? If the money is not getting there, who is suffering? Is those people are suffering, or the people of Afghanistan are suffering? People of Afghanistan are suffering, they are dying. So I think first thing that all of you should give publicity, not for the recognition of this system or that system. I don't care for this thing, I don't care for anybody what they are doing. My point is that please try to help that the money be released to Afghanistan, that we could send our money to the bank system, that it goes directly to that. That is one thing you do. The second thing, I have my heart for Ukraine. I know what's going on in Ukraine. But you know, Afghanistan have been falling out of the radar. Nobody talk about Afghanistan. Mrs. Bush and Mr. Bush, they are always have been our supportive, always have been backing up Afghan people. But every one of you should put, because you promise Afghanistan, you promise women of Afghanistan, you promise the girls of Afghanistan that you will stay behind them, you will support them, you help them to help their country to bring peace to Afghanistan. You promise them that you will stand behind their education. Please, give them publicity. Please make them to not fall out of the radar. Talk about them, communicate about them, share about them, that they need your help, they need your assistance, they need your backup. Because by ourselves, women of Afghanistan could not speak. Yes, I am here, I'm speaking out on behalf of the women of Afghanistan, but hundreds, thousands of women of Afghanistan could not come here and speak. I am one person who speaks, but all of you could speak for Afghanistan, for Afghan women, for Afghan girls. They are your children. They are like your children. They felt it, they are your children, because you promised them that. You promised that you stay behind them. All of a sudden, NATO ally left, American troop left, Afghanistan left alone, and everything went completely to zero ground. And we are starting from scratch. And that is, I want that you people think about it. You people think about it. What's happening to Afghanistan? Afghanistan is a nightmare. Afghanistan is not the same Afghanistan it was 2 years, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. Afghanistan is falling apart. There are many, many ethnic. One thing that I am not a politician, but I want to say this to you. This is from educational point of view. When we teach about democracy, about citizenship, about rule of law, these are education that is help the people to understand that. But you know, in Afghanistan right now, the people are looking what happened to our democracy. We work for democracy so much we work hard. And we give workshop after workshop. We try to make people to understand what is democracy is all about. So all of a sudden, everything is stopped completely. And that is a very sad situation, because day to day, you try to progress, not to deteriorate. And now we are deteriorating. And our young people, men and women, they are losing hopes. Our young men crying. They are suicidal. They don't know what to do. They had so much in their mind for the future. All of a sudden, they are sitting there and they don't know what to do. They do not know what to do. And they are running to another country and being killed into getting to that country. Or if they don't go, they don't have a job, they don't have education, what they should do. And they are smart and bright. And that is the thing that we should think about.
Well, Dr. Yacoubi, I think you have compelled many people to begin to pay attention, and we all have a role to play, whether it's in terms of helping those who've had to flee, it's helping those stuck in third countries, it's supporting organizations like yours and advocates like yours who are doing incredible work on the ground. You can give to Dr. Yacoubi's organization, Sakina Fund, to support her video education program and all of the other amazing things she's doing. And I hope that you will pay attention, because the news cycle has changed, but the situation in Afghanistan has not. It grows dire every single day, and we all have a role to play in making sure that we do not forget the people of Afghanistan. And we are incredibly grateful to Dr. Yacoubi for being here today. Of course, you have one more point. Please go ahead.
I just want to say one thing. I think that as a humanity, we are human. It is an act of humanity to really reach out for the Afghan women and Afghan girls. And also, it's our responsibility. Everyone has a responsibility to educate the society who are not educated. Why? Because when a society is not educated, you have all kinds of barbaric groups running away from here and there. And that is not those groups is dangerous for that nation. It's dangerous for you, for the next nation, because that is a ground, breeding ground for those different group of people who has no education. And so it is my responsibility, and it's your responsibility to make sure that those people get education, that they understand, and they will not be like a puppet every day following somebody else and not thinking for themselves. That's the reason we are teaching critical thinking, and that's the reason education is important. Every child should get education, every woman should get education, every man should get education. Education is a leading light for the population everywhere, and trust and love is with it combined. If you don't trust people and if you don't love people, you will not reach. I believe that love and trust is something that unites community after community and nation after nation. And I pray for that every one of you have that feeling as a human and humanity issue, that if you want to serve, that is humanity. That is the way that God and every religion told us, that good deed is the best solution for most of our problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yakubi. Actually have a break now, so please proceed into the foyer outside the auditorium. We have coffee, snacks, and you'll come back here in about 10-15 minutes for the next conversation with Secretary Chow and Gary Cohn. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will resume shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Director of the Bush Institute SMU Economic Growth Initiative, Cullum Clark.
Good morning, everyone. Let's start with a question. Could you please raise your hand if you know people who have moved from California to Texas for work opportunities over the last 2 years? It's looking kind of like 100%, almost 100%. Okay, now raise your hand if you know people who've gone in the other direction, from Texas to California for an opportunity over the last 2 years. Could it literally be zero? Oh my gosh. That's quite a gap. Over the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity here at the Bush Institute to write and speak a lot about why the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area ranks first among all U.S. metros for net inbound migration from elsewhere in the country. And this is both for the decade 2010 to 20 and over the last year. Houston, by the way, ranks second. At the Bush Institute, we've also written a lot about the more general question of why so many Americans are rethinking where they want to live and work, and why so many companies are reimagining where they want to base their operations. Now, our work came to the attention of a popular podcast called Freakonomics Radio. And a couple months ago, they released 2 episodes inspired by our work with the title, Why is Everyone Moving to Dallas? And the podcast pretty much went viral. Now, I highly recommend it to you, in part because it's a fun take on things that are happening here in Dallas and around our country, and it might add a little bit to our Texas swagger. But I also commend it to you because it addresses a pretty big and serious question, and that is, how can we create more prosperous, high-opportunity cities, towns, and regions in 21st century America? At the Bush Institute, I lead our Blueprint for Opportunity work, which focuses on exactly this question. A couple months ago, we put out a pair of reports making the case that great, prosperous cities of high opportunity have always shared certain commonalities. They are places that focus more than most other places on educating their young people and promoting knowledge and innovation. They pursue pro-growth, commerce-friendly policies. They attract and retain talent by offering good, affordable quality of life. They welcome enterprising newcomers from around the country and all over the world. And they build strong communities, empowering people to come together to address common challenges. Now, the DFW metro area and a handful of other metro areas, mostly in the Sun Belt, but increasingly in the Midwest as well, score higher than most other places on these metrics on the whole, despite their many challenges. And this makes them exceptionally good places to get ahead and to pursue the American dream. So at the same time, however, too many cities in our country, and indeed too many states, make it too hard to start a business, too hard to enter an occupation, too hard to build homes, too hard to find quality schools, too hard to raise a child in a safe environment, too expensive to get ahead. And that is why so many people are moving to Dallas and to other cities here in the booming Texas Triangle region. At the Bush Institute, we strongly believe America needs a fresh, pro-opportunity agenda. We have always based our work on the conviction that strong economic growth is the surest path to opening up opportunity and should be the top goal of our economic policies. Now, what does a pro-opportunity agenda look like? Here we strongly believe that it starts with outperforming all other countries in educating and training our people. It demands that we put our national fiscal house in order and recommit to American leadership in the world economy. It requires immigration reform based on the understanding that all countries, like all cities, are engaged in a ferocious competition for talent. A pro-opportunity agenda also means building the infrastructure we need to connect people, markets, and ideas. And it means tearing down the many barriers to opportunity that exist in too many parts of our country and making prosperity more inclusive everywhere. Now, this is a tall order, but as we tackle the challenge of advancing a pro-opportunity agenda here at the Bush Institute, we start with at least one, I should say, unique edge. And that is that we have the privilege and the distinct perspective that comes from doing this work here in Dallas, in the heart of one of the fastest growing, most opportunity-rich regions in the world. We're now going to turn to a conversation on economic policy, and I would like to welcome our panelists, Secretary Elaine Chao and Mr. Gary Cohn, to the stage. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
All right. Well, I'm honored to be moderating a conversation with two of our nation's most experienced and respected policymakers and thought leaders on pro-growth, pro-opportunity economic policy. Elaine Chao has served as U.S. Secretary of Transportation and U.S. Secretary of Labor. She's also served as CEO of United Way and Director of the Peace Corps, where she launched the first Peace Corps programs in the Baltic nations and newly independent republics of the former Soviet Union, including Ukraine. A Harvard Business School graduate, Secretary Chao arrived in America in third grade, not yet knowing how to speak English, became an American citizen at 19, and made history as the first Asian American woman to serve in a presidential cabinet. She's now a director of Kroger and a number of new economy tech companies in the mobility sector. We're thrilled to have Secretary Chao at the forum, not only because of her wide-ranging expertise on policy issues, but also because of her lifelong passion for promoting opportunity for all Americans.
Thank you.
Gary Cohn served as director of the White House National Economic Council from 2017 to 18. As the president's chief economic advisor, he played a central role in successful initiatives to reform our country's tax and regulatory systems and promote economic growth. Before his service in Washington, Mr. Cohn worked at Goldman Sachs for 26 years, serving for 10 of those years as president and chief operating officer of the firm. Today, Mr. Cohn is vice chairman of IBM and co-chairman of Cohn Robbins Holding Corp., as well as a board member for several companies engaged in national security, blockchain infrastructure, regulatory technology, and medtech. Mr. Cohn brings to this conversation virtually unparalleled expertise on the intersection of economic policy with private markets and the core drivers of economic growth. Secretary Chao and Mr. Cohn, we are so honored to have you here at the Bush Center.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's get into it. The economic subject at the top of everyone's minds these days is inflation. Now, I'll submit that today's inflation that we're seeing is in large measure the result of excessive spending, arguably money printing in early 2021, but it also points to bigger supply chain problems, demographic challenges, scarcity of skilled workers. I'd like to ask you both to speak to what's likely to happen in the near term as the Fed starts raising interest rates, continues to raise interest rates, but more important, I'd like to ask you, how can America address these structural challenges to ensure strong non-inflationary growth over the long term? Mr. Cohn, let's start with you.
So first of all, thank you very much. So near term, that's a tough question because I don't think a whole lot's happening in the near term. The Fed is so far behind the curve that no matter how fast they move, it almost doesn't matter. And the markets have already gotten way ahead of them in pricing in what they should have already done. So if you look at 10-year interest rates, they've moved 3.5 times higher than they were on January 1st of this year. So we've gone to 70 basis points to 2.5, 2.6% already. So, 10-year rates have doubled. So from the interest rate picture, that effect is already in the market. Unfortunately, the consumer is feeling that today. If you've got an adjustable rate mortgage, you're feeling it. If you've got credit card debt, you're feeling it. So that tool to slow down the economy is not happening. Unfortunately, the Fed doesn't know how to manufacture agricultural products. They don't know how to manufacture oil. They don't know how to get people back in the labor force. And a lot of those issues are really driving the inflation in this country. So when you ask me for the short-term solution, I don't really think they have a short-term solution. Long-term, as we do raise rates, we will have an effect. But the long-term issue to me is a real fundamental issue. We have to make a big policy decision in this country. We have to decide where we are on three major issues. We have to decide how we want climate, energy, and industrial policy to intersect. Today, the intersection of those three is the null set. So we keep trying to make policy, and we make policy in one of those areas without thinking about how it will affect the other. And until we decide how those three should affect each other, it's going to be very difficult to figure out how to grow our economy, sustain the growth, and do it in a way that that creates a non-inflationary cycle.
Okay, well, Secretary Chao, let's turn to you. What should economic policymakers be focusing on in view of these structural challenges?
I have a lot to say on there. Before I do, I want to acknowledge President and Mrs. Bush. You were very kind to mention that I'm the first Asian American woman ever to be appointed to the cabinet, and that is because of President George W. Bush's trust in me. Thank you, sir. I think on April 12th, when the CPI was released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which was in the Department of Labor, the inflationary numbers were much worse than expected. And there's a short term, as you mentioned, and a long term. If I can just go on the short term, I think in the short term, 40% of the inflationary increases are due to energy. You who are in this state that is so involved with energy production understand what the FERC has recently done on February 17th, and also what the Interior Department has done. FERC basically came out with a new rule that discouraged the laying of new pipelines. So at the very minimum, this president currently in office needs to allow and reverse the decision on the Keystone XL pipeline, number one. Number two, on FERC, they have got to rescind a recent ruling that they had issued on February 17th that basically discouraged the laying down of new pipeline. Number three, the Interior Department has issued new rules now discouraging drilling. They think that drilling, oil and gas drilling, is no longer a national priority. And so what they've done is to decrease the allowance for new leases. And then secondly, they've asked for increased royalties on leases for purchasers. And number three, they basically have set a whole new procedure for approving these leases so that they are very bureaucratic and much more difficult for purchasers to be able, to drill for new oil and gas properties. And so that has a direct impact, obviously, on energy expectations going forward with present ramifications. Longer term, I think what Gary said is absolutely correct, which is the government should not be competing with the private sector in compensating the workforce, which has been what's happening. So there is a piece of legislation that's pending out there, BBB, Build Back Better, which is going to add additional stimulus to the economy. We do not need that. Okay. We don't need any more additional stimulus. Secondly, I think it's going back to what President Bush has said, we need to be taking a look at immigration reform. We need to have a merit-based, work-based visa system that allows workers to come into this country and work. Number three, we need to be taking a look at some of the ports that are delayed with long lines in Long Beach and Los Angeles, for example, and look at the East Coast ports and some of the southern coast ports and ask, why do they not have backups? And it's because they have less stringent work rules, they have more flexible hours. So let's take a look at that. And then also the private sector needs to be, needs to be alleviated of all of this regulatory burden. The Fed has their role. They've got to continue to raise rates, as harsh as that may sound. And then also, we need to have tariffs lifted on steel and also on lumber, because they are continuing to add inflationary pressures as well. So unless those straightforward, seemingly simple but politically fraught solutions are looked upon, I don't think very much would change. And I might also put a plug in for the Bush Institute's 4% solution. For those of you that have not read that book, you've got to read that book. Because it talks about all of these issues and how commonsensical they are, but again, we just don't have the will, and it's fraught with politics.
Well, thank you for the plug. The bookstore's over there, and there are copies for sale. You both talked about how to break through the, in many cases, regulation-imposed barriers to supply growth, supply chain issues, and so forth. But in some ways, you could say maybe the toughest supply issue is increasing the supply of skills, of addressing the shortages of skilled workers in so many fields. So, Secretary Chow, let's start with you on this one. What do you think are the most impactful steps that we can do, federal, state, local policy, and so forth, to prepare future workers for the economy of the 21st century and also help people who feel left behind to re-engage?
Well, we are now in an information technology. You know, it used to be that if you were, if you discontinue school at a certain level, like a, I should put it differently. If you are a stationary operator and a stationary engineer, which used to be called a custodian, you basically had a tool belt that was very heavy. Nowadays, you walk around with one little gadget that can tell you what the HVAC system in your building is doing. And so our country is now increasingly sophisticated. The skills required of our workforce is increasingly sophisticated. So the number one admonition is that we've got to persuade our young people to stay in school. And that's where President Bush's No Child Left Behind educational initiative was so important during his tenure. And number two, during his tenure, during his administration, we actually tried to reform the training systems, the training programs of this country by basically investing in workers, by giving them a discrete amount of money that they themselves can choose how they want to reinvest in workforce training. Right now, we have a system where you have to go to the government-trained systems, and they tell you what you have to be trained in, whether you're interested or not, and whether there's a market demand or not. So the current government system can be educating, training 1,000 hairdressers for a little community that perhaps only needs 16. We need information technology, specialists, and it doesn't have to be 4-year college. It can be a 2-year college, it can be a certification program, a Microsoft certified program to be a information programmer. That would be very helpful in developing a career path. And so I'm a great believer, as the former president, in community colleges. And the No Child Left Behind was a great piece of legislation. It emphasizes education, and then afterwards, we need to continue to train our workforce, and that can be done through the workforce training, through giving people more flexibility and more control over the dollars that they can use themselves for workforce training.
Good. Mr. Cohen, let's pose the same question to you. So what are the most impactful things we can do? And I do want to ask you, in view of your Goldman Sachs experience, could you also address how can the private sector play a role?
So first of all, I agree with everything Secretary Chow just said. So I don't want to repeat that. So let me avoid that.
That's a good pattern we've had in the past.
It is. I'll just agree with everything you say. So again, I got to go back to my first question. What's our industrial policy in this country? Do we want to be an industrialized nation or not? Answer that for me, and I'll tell you a little bit what I think we should do on the educational system. If we do, we've got to make that decision. If we don't, we've got to make a different decision. We're not going to get that answered right now. So let me then peel back the onion a little bit on the whole educational process. I think we have the complete wrong metric in this country. So we judge success on education, you know, the benchmark, and we talk about charter schools, and I'm involved in charter schools, and everyone is, and we all want to educate kids. The benchmark is only how many kids get into college, how many kids graduate from college. I think we have to throw that out the window. We should create a benchmark of how many kids are self-sustaining individuals by, I don't care, pick an age, 22 years of age. So you can make a decision when you graduate college and go spend money and get an education, and then 4 years later get a job, probably pay off a bunch of student debt, and it's years till you're self-sustaining. You can go into a trade school today and start working as an electrician, a plumber, a carpenter that day. Work as an apprentice. This is how my parents grew up. Work as an apprentice, get a paycheck, get an education at the same time, and in that 4-year period, you'll be a self-sustaining individual, able to support yourself, able to live a decent life with complete ability to keep moving up and keep earning more and filling a need that we have. So we've got a lot of programs in this country. We just have to make it that these are interesting programs where kids want to go down these paths versus telling everyone that, no, you've got to go to college. No, you've got to go to college. You've got to go to college to do certain things. And Secretary Chow's right. Many of our most talented computer programmers today and many of our greatest software engineers today, they didn't graduate from college.
Right.
Like, they just learned the skills somewhere, or they got into a Microsoft, or they got into a Google, or they got into Facebook, or they got into an IBM, and somehow they got in and they sort of picked up the skill. So in many respects, we self-perpetuate this outcome of guiding our youth down this strange path of there's one path to success. There are lots of paths to success. And so when you ask the second part of the question, I think companies today, especially in the labor market we have today, there's not a CEO that I talk to in the world today that doesn't tell me their number 1, 2, and 3 problem is attracting and retaining talent, attracting and retaining talent, and attracting and retaining talent. And they all say, like price is not the issue. I'll pay what I need to pay. So we're in an environment today where talent is a scarce commodity. People will hire anyone. They will take chances. They will educate. They will send people to school. It was mentioned what Amazon's doing after 90 days. They're sending people to college. Almost every company I know today has some type of learning on the job or learning outside the job where companies are willing to contribute to people's well-being, even if it means that the job they're in, they won't be in when they get done with that learning career, whether it's a 6-month program, a 12-month program, or a 4-year program.
Could I follow up on the actual question that you posed at the beginning, which is, do we want to be an industrial nation? President Biden is very much out there saying he wants to, in a sense, subsidize reshoring of supply chains. Is that the answer, or is it deeper international integration? If we want to become an industrial nation, what's the path?
Well, so look, can we be an industrial nation and have zero pollutants and be carbon free and do everything we want to do? I don't know if we can do that. My actual opinion, and there's probably debates in this room, there are certain things that we have to reshore. I think if we didn't learn this in the last couple of years, there are some vital resources that are important to us that we need to make sure that we have the ability and we are manufacturing and storing here domestically in the United States. There are many other goods that we, as the consumers of the world, love to consume, but they're clearly not essential items. They're clearly non-essential items. I'm not sure we have to be the manufacturer of those non-essential items. And I know this part of the equation. I know that we can't compete on price. And so to the extent that we become the manufacturer of those non-essential items, we are going to create major inflation. Right. Because, look, let's be honest. We would be competing against China, where the cost of capital is 0. The cost of labor, unfortunately, is dramatically below our cost of labor. Whether they're paying a living wage or not, we don't know. Their cost for the environment, unfortunately, because we only have one environment, they're not taking care of the environment, is low. So therefore, they will be able to produce products at a substantially lower cost than we can produce products here in the United States. So if we want to produce those nice to have, not need to have items, we could clearly do it, but it's going to dramatically change the price point at which consumers are going to be able to pay for them. And by essence, they're either going to have less of them,
Right.
or we're going to have a completely different wage cycle and inflation cycle in this country.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I totally agree with Gary. And by the way, I loved working with Gary. So, but what you pose is a very important question. We know what needs to be done, but I hope that people will understand it's not that easy, because manufacturing on the decline occurred over 40 years. And so it will take us some time to ramp up and reshore as well.
Could we turn to physical infrastructure, something, Secretary Chow, you've had enormous experience with? So the legislation Congress passed last year will promise us to spend, I think, about $650 billion over the old baseline over a decade. I'd like to ask you both, starting with you, two questions. One is, what do we most need to be investing infrastructure-wise? What are the key priorities? And the second is, studies show, and this was really troubling, I think, to me, that it costs more than twice as much to build some forms of physical infrastructure in our country than even in the countries of Western Europe. What's gone wrong, and how can we do things more efficiently?
Well, I wish that our infrastructure bill passed, because it would have invested more in actual infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and secondly, it would have allowed much greater role of participation by the private sector. So of the $650 billion, basically only $110 billion are really for roads and bridges. And the remainder are for transit, bike trails, electric vehicles, and other types of transportation or infrastructure. A broadband, for example, which I totally support, which is very essential for rural America. Sure. But what we're also seeing is that of that 110, you ask a very pivotal question, and that is, what is good for America? And the key of that is, what is good for the whole country is misleading, because our country's infrastructure is very decentralized. And so what we should be emphasizing is giving the states and the localities greater flexibility to do what they think is best. Texas has very different views about roads and bridges than does San Francisco or Los Angeles, and maybe San Francisco. And so our transportation policy should be flexible enough that allows the states to decide for themselves whether they want to invest in roads and bridges or whether they want to invest in transit. There's been more and more encroachment into the monies that are allotted for roads and bridges, because now 25% of the gasoline tax, which traditionally has been used to fund highways, is now for transit. And as we talk about, Gary and I were talking about a decrease in gasoline tax. We've had this new infrastructure bill, but there's talk also about rolling back the source of revenue for this infrastructure bill. So I think, I think the rural broadband is terrific. Going forward, I think we need to give the states more flexibility. On the second part now, about why is it so expensive? So I started my job as Secretary of Transportation, and I'm going to Alaska, and everybody's so excited I'm going to Alaska. Before a principal goes to a state, they try to find you an announceable, something that you can give. So they said, we've got a great announceable for you. You can say that you have now given the final EIS for Sterling Highway in Alaska. So I say, and I innocently ask, so how long did it take to get this EIS for the Sterling Highway in Alaska? And the answer came back, 37 years. So I said, I'm not so sure that's a great thing for me to bring up to Alaska. But so what is happening is that the approval process, the permitting process, is so onerous that we, in fact, beat out Europe in terms of bureaucracy and delays. In this particular bill, that's why I say that I wish that our bill had passed, is that there is project labor agreements. Under President Obama, project labor agreements, which requires unionized labor, was suggested on projects over $25 million. Now it is required for every project over $35 million. And on top of that, there's prevailing wage. So that's going to eat up about a third of the cost of a third of the monies that would be allowed to be used for infrastructure.
And this is the Davis-Bacon Act.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I just give you so Secretary Chow, we spend an enormous amount of time on this topic. Guys, I think it was a passion of both of ours, understanding how broken it was. I'm going to just give you a quick answer on top of what the Secretary said, because I think this is what's really misunderstood about infrastructure, and the Secretary touched on it a little bit. But think about infrastructure in the United States. 90% regulated and funded by the federal government, less than 10% owned by the federal government. Yeah. I'm giving you a second to think about that, okay? So when people talk about infrastructure, we talk about it, but then when you go to execute, it's not a plan. It's little isolated projects. Like, does shovel ready ring a bell with anyone? Like, it's little isolated projects. If we really are serious about infrastructure in this country, and we talked about this, we would have an infrastructure plan for the country. And when you say Europe can do it cheaper, it's because Europe has an infrastructure plan. When they're going to build a cross-European rail system or a electric grid that goes from country A to country B to country C, they plan it. They don't build one tower from point A to point B. They build 80 towers at once. We build one tower from A to B. And then we go away for a few years, then we come back and build tower 2, and it's really expensive to build it that way. So again, if we would sit down and get all of the players to agree, which would be hard. This would be hard, because if we were going to do something, there would clearly be a state left out, and they would say, look, I'm not getting my fair share. It would be hard to do. But that said, I think if you really wanted to do this right, and you really sat back and said, look, we've got to revamp the infrastructure of the United States. We've got to modernize it. We'll do that. We'll do that along with, and I know General Mattis is going to talk later, Secretary Mattis is going to talk later, we've got to revamp our military. A lot of our military is going to be unmanned, unwomen vehicles. So we can put those sites in different states where we sit, and you start picking places and saying, okay, you're going to get this big piece of infrastructure. You're going to get this unmanned center. You're going to get we could make it work. We just have to decide that's what we want to do. And until we do that, we're just going to do independent projects, and they're going to be really expensive.
Let's talk about innovation in America. Some argue that really socially significant innovation has actually slowed in the US, and you all will know Peter Thiel famously said, we wanted flying cars, and instead we got 140 characters. And you can kind of debate how useful Twitter has really been. It's up for grabs. But I would love to ask you both. So Secretary Chow, let's start with you. In what fields do you expect truly transformational, exciting technological change? What's exciting that you're seeing out there?
I think the transportation sector is just so exciting in the transformational technologies that we are seeing. And for example, like AVs, automated vehicles, self-driving vehicles. We don't call them driverless cars because actually, if you look at the terminology, 74% of Americans actually don't like that word. So it's kind of a disincentive. So self-driving cars. And then you have drones, technology, and then basically supersonic flight is coming back. Noise pollution is being addressed. And then also commercial space. High-speed rail is another alternative here. There's a very promising high-speed rail project between Houston and Dallas. It's Central, Texas Central. Yeah, a high-speed rail project. And so all of this has great promise. As for the government, for us, the government is a regulator. So it really can't promote innovation, but it can regulate safety, security, and privacy without hampering innovation. That's the important part. The regulators, the government, has a role in doing their job, but if they just would do their job without hampering innovation, that will allow innovation to occur. So AVs, we have 38,000 people who die in traffic deaths, accidents. And automated vehicles can reduce that number because 94% of accidents occur due to human error. And then think about the disabled or the elderly. Automated vehicles will give back to these populations, these communities, their freedom. And then and this is also being applied on the commercial side. If you take a 1,000-mile trip, it would take about, by truck, it'll take about 22 hours. Do you know why? Because there is a 10-hour rest period, 12-hour rest period, which is required for human drivers. And if you had automated vehicles, which is not to supplant the workforce, it is to augment the worker shortage, including the shortage of 80,000 truck drivers in our economy, you can actually cut back on that time period of, you can have a trip that will span 1,000 miles basically in 10, 12 hours. So that's going to help the efficiency and productivity of our transportation system as well.
I remember a couple of years ago at the forum, Jeff Bezos said that innovation won't reduce labor, it will make labor more engaging. It will make work more. So, Mr. Cohen, how about you?
I'll throw a couple out there that William touched on. I think the machine learning, artificial intelligence, we're still at the beginning of that game. Quantum computing, really interesting space. We're not even sure what it can do. And one you and I have talked about, which I think is interesting, it's got a bad connotation right now, which is blockchain.
Yeah.
I think the blockchain really has phenomenally interesting, practical, everyday uses that will become part of our life over the next decade.
So I want to follow up on that because people may, if they've read about blockchain at all, maybe they think it's what you trade Bitcoin on, or maybe and it's a way like Silk Road, it's a way to move money illicitly around. How can this actually make life better for ordinary Americans?
So look, that's why I said it has some negative connotations because they think of it as cryptocurrencies. And look, blockchain is a functionality. It's a clearing system with title and data and information, trying to simplify it. So the simple example I use is the old archaic way that we transfer housing titles or mortgage title. If you go out and buy a house, you've got to have someone do mortgage title research, and then you've got to go buy title insurance. If you sell that house to me literally a week later, I've got to go pay someone to, guess what? Go do title research, and then I got to go buy title insurance. You would think if someone did it once and put it in an immutable system, that we could just transfer the same historical data from buyer to buyer to buyer. If that were in the blockchain, we would be able to transfer that data, and we'd have this perpetual data stream of exactly what happened with that house. And so we could buy and sell houses on almost a daily basis. And the bank could give you a mortgage on a daily basis because they would know exactly the title, who owns the house, what the history of the house is. That's a really simple example where I think everyday Americans would really benefit from the ability and the ease and the simplicity and save money in transacting in something that they're spending more money than they need to today.
To follow up on one other, you and I have talked about, you've been in the financial sector for most of your life, and we've talked about the challenge that banking
Right. Yep.
lower income people is a loss-making proposition for
Exactly.
a bank. Can we fix that?
Yeah, look, with where we're headed in blockchain and where I think central banks are heading to digital currencies, I do believe that the major central banks around the world are going to digitize their currencies. So once you have a clearing system that works frictionless and basically costless, you now have a digital dollar or a digital yen or a digital euro or a digital pound. You now can create a digital bank account. You need I don't want to get too detailed, a know your customer digital system, a anti-money laundering system. They're available, they're readily available. And once you do that, you can now bank anyone in America. and it doesn't cost you something to have that account open. So the issue historically for the lower income earners in America who actually get really taken advantage by the system. They go to payday lenders and they're being charged 10 to 20% to cash a paycheck. They could actually have a bank account where they would save all of those frictional costs, and the banks could afford to have them have a bank account because the cost of that bank account would actually be zero. Once you have a digital currency and you had a frictionless way to move currency through the system. So I do think this blockchain, along with these digital fiat currencies, will dramatically change the availability of banking, not just in the United States, around the world.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to add a couple more things. One is drones. We didn't talk enough about drones. Drones can be enormously helpful in increasing productivity, increasing efficiencies with last mile delivery, because that is the most expensive, the hardest. It's congestion, it's congested, that last mile. And also we're seeing drones now deployed in so many different ways, and General Mattis will talk about that as well. They use it much more in the Army, but whenever there was a hurricane or a forest fire and infrastructure needs to be rebuilt, basically drones are used to fly over the particular area and assess the damage so that we get much better reports as to what is the rehabilitation.
Aren't they also delivering pharmaceuticals to the biggest senior living facility in America, in Central Florida?
They are, and they're also delivering needed essential goods overseas as well. So drones are certainly, an up-and-coming technology. People don't like it, though. Some people are concerned about the privacy. So that's why the role of the regulator is to engage with the new emerging technologies in a way that addresses legitimate public concerns about safety, security, privacy without hampering innovation. And then also talk about commercial space. Because of the advent of relaunchable, rockets, it's now so much less expensive to send a rocket up into space. And we are now seeing the possibility of space tourism. And no longer will it be the purview of billionaires to go and enjoy outer space, but potentially ordinary human beings as well.
Could I ask you both briefly about a subject that could easily be a whole forum in itself, which is the challenge posed by China? There seems to be a growing political consensus, maybe almost the only thing the two parties agree on some degree of deliberate decoupling of the U.S. and Chinese economies. How do you all think about all this? Are we moving in the right direction on that front? Secretary Chow, you first.
Well, President George H.W. Bush was prescient in being among the very first Americans to go to China, open it up, understand the people, and for his whole entire life, dedicate himself, among many other causes, to improving overall better relations for the harmony of the world. And so as a Chinese American, this issue has particular resonance because obviously, my family came from there. What I'm really concerned about in terms of this U.S.-China relations is the deterioration and the impact on Asian Americans. Because the increase in anti-Asian hate and harassment is a real occurrence, and the community is very frightened. And it doesn't matter whether you're Chinese American or you're Japanese American or Korean American. I hate to say it, but most people can't tell the difference. And so it impacts all the community. I think it's really important that we continue to engage with China. There are legitimate, very legitimate differences, but it's really important that we continue engagement, a dialogue, so that we have an opportunity to influence the development of that country. And I also want to say President George W. Bush also was there when he was very young, visiting his parents, and I still remember those stories and the impressions that he had.
I want to hear those someday myself.
Yes, they're great stories.
Mr. Cohn.
So we're in unanimous agreement here. So I think the reality of decoupling from China is completely unrealistic. I like to hear people talk about it. It's amusing to me. If you actually would plot out on a chart, and we did this in the White House, what we import from China and where else we could get it, there's a lot of things over there that I don't know where else we're getting them. So someone's going to have to tell me where we're going to get those things. So China is a lot more vital to our well-being than we want to admit, we want to understand, and we want to acknowledge. So you have to start with that. So if we wanted to decouple with China, it would be a multi-decade process. And if the Chinese thought we were in a multi-decade process, they could really inflict massive pain and say, no, we're cutting you off today. Now go ahead, America, tell me how to live your life. So there's a practical reality side. Then I look at it from an economic standpoint. You know, we're 350 million people here in the United States. I think they're 1.4 billion, growing in wealth, growing in economic size. Wouldn't we want them as customers for our growing companies? Wouldn't we want to have a relationship to export to someone that's 4 times your size and growing in wealth and growing in accumulation? It seems to me that if we could figure out how to balance this difficult equation, I completely agree. This is a difficult equation. I'm not dismissing all of the issues that exist here. There are a lot of issues to be worked out. If we can balance this equation, there's a lot in it for both sides. In the place that's being underplayed completely, you know, we've got a huge competitive advantage that we do grow an enormous amount of food. And, you know, we are in a cycle right now where food, and agricultural products specifically, are becoming so important to the world. Yep. And I think the biggest issue for China right now is food and food scarcity. And there are opportunities for us to, you know, get in real dialogue with China if we want to and say, hey, look, we are the growers of food in the world. We historically paid farmers not to grow. We could pay farmers actually to grow. We could export more food to China and get something out of that, because I do think there's a real scarcity issue right now.
One last rapid fire question, just a one phrase answer to you both. As you noted before, Secretary Chow, we published a book 10 years ago on how America can attempt to grow at 4% a year. If we republish that book today, what is the chapter heading we most need to have in it?
It's still relevant. Everything in there is relevant. You got to get the book and read it.
Okay. Mr. Cohn.
The world runs on chips.
The world runs on chips. Thank you. I think we've learned a whole lot in a short period of time. We have certainly learned that whether we are talking about creating the talent development pipeline of the future, whether we are talking about the technologies of the future, we have the ideas, we have the private sector that knows how to do it. We need the political will to remove some of the barriers that policy has sometimes put in the way. And maybe we do need to actually republish that book and bring it up to date. Secretary Chow, Mr. Cohn, we are honored to have you here. Thank you so much for spending your time with us.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bradford M. Freeman, Managing Director of Global Policy at the George W. Bush Institute, David Kramer.
Good morning, good morning. Our nation's calling. It's the title of this forum. It's also a theme that runs through all of our work on the domestic side and on the global side, and it's the global side that I focus on. You see it in our work on human freedom, where we support democracy and human rights activists around the world. We advance civil society around the world, and we also raise awareness about the growing threats coming from authoritarian regimes. We do it through our democracy talks, our catalysts, our scholarship programs, and it's great work that's been done here for many years. We also do it through our Women's Initiative, and you saw evidence of that earlier today with Natalie and Dr. Yakubi here, where we try to make sure that women are in fact empowered. We want to make sure that half of the world's population, women, have the same rights as the other half of the population, men. And we want to make sure that they also have access to healthcare, education, and all the other things that make for a better and more prosperous and safer society for all of us. And then, of course, most relevant to this panel that we're about to have now is our work on global health, where we have really talked about the the impact that the President's PEPFAR initiative has had. Next year will mark the 20th anniversary of PEPFAR. We're also on cervical cancer. This work literally saves lives. And it's some of this work that we want to focus on here on this panel. All of this work, by the way, really goes hand in hand with each other. The more democratic a society is, the more likely women will be empowered, the more likely public health will be tended to appropriately. And so all of these things come together as one, and that's why I think the work that the Bush Institute is so critically important. This panel, by the way, is sponsored by Smoothie King, so we want to thank them for helping us get this together. And we have a panel with the title, Courage and Compassion, America's Leadership in Global Health. And we have two outstanding speakers to join us here today, Dr. Deborah Birx and Dr. Stephen Hahn, if I could ask them to come on out.
David, thank you.
Hi.
So, Dr. Stephen Hahn is the former commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration and now CEO and partner at Flagship Pioneering and also CEO of Harbinger Health. And Dr. Deborah Birx is one of our own, a senior fellow here at the Bush Institute. We're thrilled to have you. And also, of course, the former U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator and also the U.S. Special Representative for Global Health Diplomacy. Both, I think, are familiar faces from TV over the past few years, but we're delighted that you're here with us in person. So, Dr. Birx, let me start with you and just ask you about the importance of U.S. leadership when it comes to global health. Why should the U.S. play such an important role, obviously with allies, but why is it so important for the United States to take the lead?
Well, believe it or not, we're the only bilateral programs almost anywhere in the world at this point. And what do I mean by that? That means that the U.S. is one of the few countries that still has Americans on the ground working on health issues in partnership with countries and communities. Many other countries have moved to funding the Global Fund for HIV, TB, and malaria, and other global health programs that confront maternal mortality and other health issues. But in doing so, they often removed a lot of their bilateral presence. And why is that important? Well, we all know that the best way to get things done is to work in partnership every day, not on Zoom, in the person, with the communities, listening to communities, and working with governments. And I was so impressed when President Bush always talks about compassion. But what people, in my mind, what he means by that is humility to listen to others. Because you really can't have compassion for others unless you're listening to others. And I think that's what PEPFAR has done, which has tackled HIV. That is what the President's Malaria Initiative has done, that's tackled malaria. That is what the Millennium Challenge Corporation has done. And those are all programs that were set up during the Bush administration. And I think that translation of compassion into partnerships by listening and being humbled by not realizing you don't know everything is so critical for U.S. relationships. I think the one thing that's always missing, David, and it always drives me crazy, is foreign policy groups always meet and they never include health. And the health sector is critical for cultures to thrive, for communities to thrive, for women to thrive. They have to be healthy. And so I've always pushed for foreign policy to be embedded in the health of the nation. And I think the US recognizes that and does that. And I don't think you have successful foreign policy and relationships unless you have successful health programs.
Dr. Hahn, let me turn to you and ask you, from coming out of the COVID pandemic, there was amazing and rapid success in development and distribution of vaccines. How does that portend for future biomedical innovations? And a lot of people would ask, if we can do that so quickly for COVID, coming up with a vaccine, why can't we do that for other threatening diseases?
Well, thanks, David. And first of all, I want to thank President and Mrs. Bush. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you very much. And believe it or not, it's great to be on camera again with Dr. Birx. And I really mean that. So David, it's a really good point you're making. And when I went to the agency, I established 3 priorities, and one of them was, let's advance innovation. There's so much going on, particularly in biotech, but in medicine in general, and the Human Genome Project, et cetera, and the development of medical products to really combat serious diseases. And so what could we do to spur innovation? And boy, that was before COVID, and boy, did we have to really spur innovation during COVID, prioritizing science and the most important medical products to combat the disease. And so we learned something about ourselves, I think, as a country, as a world, and at the agency for sure, and that is we can do this. Identification of the virus in January, first authorization of a vaccine in December, 11 months. That is, I think we called it a grand slam, a medical miracle at the time. We didn't expect that to occur, but it showed that we can do it when we come together around a common purpose. So I think it's right to ask the question, why can't we do that every day of every year to address some of the most urgent human medical needs that we have? So there's lots of things that we can think about for doing that, but the approaches that were used during that time of bringing the private sector together with government, with academia, I think can work in normal times. And just one major point for me and one takeaway, it's why I didn't go back to academia, but went into the private sector, is that if we didn't learn the importance of a robust private sector and having to do everything possible to reduce barriers to innovation and enabling the private sector during COVID, then we'll never really learn that lesson. And so it's really important that we maintain that, we have the appropriate oversight, but that we really foster that innovation that comes from the private sector.
But let me push you a little bit. Do we need a kind of mass mobilization to address the danger of cancer, for example? President Biden has talked about the space shot, I think is the term he's used. Is the approach that you, Dr. Birx, and others took to address the COVID threat something we need for that, or can we do it other ways?
Well, I think we have to do it other ways. It's not sustainable what happened during COVID. And I mean, Deb, maybe you have a different point of view here, but it was an extraordinary time and it was a public health emergency. So of course, extraordinary measures are taken, and we won't need to have some of the measures we had in place. But think about some of the things for enabling, moving innovation forward. Like at the agency, it was rolling reviews, interactions with the sponsors, really helping them understand what they needed to do to answer the questions that the regulators need to approve a product. There's lots of things that can be put in place that I think that should be normal for us. Very controversial would be accelerated approval of medical products, because we've seen a lot in the press about that. But the bottom line is there are things that government can do to provide the appropriate oversight to make sure that products are safe and effective, but at the same time, get out of the way.
Deb, let me ask you about an all-of-government approach. Some people might think it's the CDC, the NIH, FDA, HHS, sound like an alphabet soup, but Pentagon gets involved, State Department gets involved. There's a lot that need to get involved in all of these to make a successful campaign.
That's what PEPFAR proved to us. So it wasn't that President Bush believed that we could get 2 million people on treatment, which at the time I can tell you was frightening. I just want to be clear. That was a very frightening number because there was really no one on treatment in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think the vision of that we are stronger as whole of government, but many people, particularly the private sector, doesn't understand that the federal government is essentially against change and against doing things in a big, different way. You stay in the federal government either because you've learned how to make it work and get things done really quickly, and there's big money and you can get big money doing great things, or it's a safe place. Mm-hmm. And so when presidents come in and want to initiate a new program like PEPFAR, there is a lot of bickering among the federal workforce. Some look at the trajectory and say, I think we can outlast him. And they're like, okay, let's just put on that's not a lot, not do it. And so change management in the federal government, and I've had to do it 3 times, is very difficult. PEPFAR was a huge inflection point in change management because it said we are stronger as whole of government. And I will tell you, 19 years later, the agencies are still arguing about where PEPFAR should reside. Yet, the brilliance of putting it in the State Department said that we need a coordinator that doesn't have self-interest in getting money for themselves. And so the State Department puts out the money based on results, accountability, and progress in a very transparent manner, and the agencies implement. But the State Department in that way then can hold the agencies accountable for implementation. And we implement through DOD because DOD has unique relationships with ministries of defense, and obviously soldiers and sailors are at risk for many of these infectious diseases. USAID has a unique ability to work in a specific way with some of the community groups, CDC, with ministries of health. And we brought in Treasury because some of this required reforms of tax collection to create sustainable programs. And I think so that kind of whole of government was the same whole of government approach to COVID. And that's why, in a way, it was a little bit easier for me because I was used to coordinating a lot of agencies that didn't always get along, but agreed on the mission, but didn't always agree that one agency should get more money than they do. So in the federal government, and sometimes results aren't as important as how much money you're able to get and how many people you employ in that particular agency. So turning into a results-driven program was absolutely critical, and I think a vertical program that created horizontal capacity was exactly what sub-Saharan Africa needed to respond to COVID. So sometimes when you do these things, you don't know that you're creating something bigger. I mean, we're extraordinarily successful in HIV around the globe, but at the same time, we created a response of human capacity, data, knowledge, access, community engagement that was absolutely critical for COVID.
And talk a little more, if you would, about a data-driven process, because I know this is a very important issue to you. How receptive were other parts of the government to that, and how were you able to get that done?
Well, you know, PEPFAR, MCC, PMI, all of the infectious disease programs that were set up were results-driven. But I could see when I took over in 2014 that it wasn't enough to just measure inputs and outputs, that we had to really move to outcomes and impact. And so we decided that in order to hold people accountable, you had to be completely transparent. And that's the other piece of this that I think sometimes we forget in battling pandemics. Critical that all of your data is in the public arena and is transparent. So the communities, the governments, the partners see their results, how they're performing next to others, what they need to do to improve. And when it's all public, so all of the PEPFAR data is at pepfar.gov is public and it's completely transparent. We could learn a lesson here in the United States about that. That's how we made progress, because that's how you see who you're missing. Data is only helpful if it creates an action. And I think you see that in the Bush Institute today. They collect the data, but it's not to have a data and publish a pamphlet. It's to change a policy to have an action. And I think we in PEPFAR were very dedicated to using data to point out where we had a problem. And to be honest, we had to bring in the private sector. You know, we got 15 years into the program, and we finally looked deep dive into our data and realized that we were missing all the men, at least 50% of the men, because healthy men don't come to clinics in Africa. Could be a problem here in the US too. Healthy men out there.
Steve and I will skip over that.
We're going to
But, you know, we had the private sector come in and talk to men. Can you imagine that? Sitting down with male groups and saying, what do you really need in order to come to the clinic? Well, you need to be open at 6:30 on the way to work. It can't take a long time. By the way, we don't want women physicians. We think they gossip. We do not. We don't find you that interesting.
We do, actually.
We are not gossiping about you. But we met the men where they were with their needs. And I think sometimes when we look at data by a state, we lose the nuances, and I think that's happening today between the rural areas and urban areas, and we're missing the structural barriers to access to healthcare that exists in our rural areas.
And you know, just to follow up what Deb said, I think we could tie together those 2 points. And your leadership
in the White House at that time was just so critical, because for me, connecting the dots between the data and the transparency and then the outcomes, you said both are important, and if you don't have the data or you have faulty data, you're not really measuring the right outcomes. And it wasn't until Deb had sort of built the infrastructure during COVID for us to look at these data that we could start to figure out and ask and then answer some questions. And so I'm thinking about supply chain, distribution of products that were authorized, et cetera, real problems that we had, at least at the beginning of the pandemic. But they're problems that need to be solved now, and we need to have an infrastructure around data, the transparency, et cetera.
You know, it's shocking. We can get HIV drugs to the most rural village in Africa. I'm not sure that we can say that about antivirals here in the United States.
Or monoclonal.
So I think, you know, there are lessons learned from global programs that are executed by Americans in partnership on the ground, who are learning from communities, learning from governments, learning what works, and translating that back home to improve our systems.
But is that a function of logistics? Is it a function of political will? Is it a function of societal resistance? How do you explain that?
It's a function of data. So not to scare anyone, because Owen just said I shouldn't scare anyone. But if you go on a website today and you look at where the level 1 trauma sites are, and you look that they're in the urban areas, and a lot of Americans don't live in urban areas, and you've heard about the golden hour. A lot of Americans are way past that golden hour and to get to those level 1 trauma centers. And so I think it's a matter of what we did in PEPFAR, and I think it changed everything. We came into PEPFAR in 2014, and we mapped every single service delivery site that we had, so that we could see every place we were working and understand, was it reaching the community? So we did this geospatial mapping, we put it all together, and I couldn't understand why near the lake in Kenya, people were still dying at a disproportionate rate. So I could see people dying, I didn't know why. I mapped everything, and I realized that if you were in a Lua region, which is one of the tribes out in that area near Lake Kisumu, that you had more than 5 or 10 miles to get to a clinic. If you were anywhere else in Kenya, it was 2.5. So, you know, it's just not the number of things, it's where those things are. And that kind of critical geospatial mapping, I learned from the private sector, who taught us that in how they decide whether to put in another Starbucks or not. I mean, you really need to learn from the private sector, use the techniques that they use to bring in better delivery and better infrastructure. And so if you go right now to the ASPR website, you can see where there are therapeutics available for COVID. Right now, there's a lot of rural parts of America that don't have immediate access. Those are the kind of structural barriers that we addressed in PEPFAR to ensure that every mother had access as soon as she found out she was pregnant to antivirals to save herself and her child. That's the kind of timing and kind of urgency we need to bring to our healthcare response.
Steve, both of you have touched on the role of the private sector, and I want you to dive into that a little more. In your previous position, you were getting political pressure, you were getting pressure from the pharmaceutical industry, and yet you also had a process to follow, and you also had the recognition that without the private sector, much of what you both were trying to accomplish would not have happened. So how do you view the role of the private sector and the interaction with the government?
So I think one thing that really helped was that the agency, the FDA, had moved beyond this concept that the private sector was in fact an enemy, and that working with the private sector was really important to bring medical products to the American people and the world. And I think recognizing that the FDA's patient was the American people, and that our job was to get as speedily but as safely as possible great medical products to them was really important. So it started kind of with a cultural change that has taken place over the last 10 to 15 years at the FDA. But then we're in the middle of a medical emergency. We need diagnostics, we need ventilators, we need personal protective equipment, we need therapeutics, et cetera, and of course a vaccine. And so there was really only one way of that occurring, and that was engagement with the private sector. So we had to rethink the way that we were going to approach this, and we had this legislation from President Bush's time that allowed us to have emergency use authorization, which was enormously helpful and provided a flexibility around what we could do. So first of all, instead of first in, first out, it was let's prioritize on the basis of science and impact. What are we going to look at first in line that's going to have the greatest impact and save lives? So that was one example of that. But the processes in general were, let's engage the private sector early, often, give really good guidance about what needs to be done so that we can ensure to the American people that we're doing the absolute best job for safety and efficacy. But let me emphasize one other point, and this is something that as a doc you know all the time, you have to be pragmatic. You see someone in the emergency room, you have a limited amount of information. You're going to make the best decision you can in an emergency situation. When you gather more data and then in the intensive care unit on the floor, you're going to update your diagnosis and your treatment. This is what we had to do at the agency. This is what the government had to do. This is what Deb brought from her experience at PEPFAR. The decisions aren't going to be perfect. We have to recognize that. We have to be transparent about it. But we need to constantly update them. And that's not because your doctor or whoever was wrong, it's because we have more information. And this was happening in real time. So there's a lot of lessons that can be learned that could speed this and that could really sort of enable our interaction. And this could be done on a regular basis every day.
Let me ask a question for both of you, and maybe Steve, start with you. The issue of health equity. How can you address this so that a pandemic or even something short of a pandemic does not exacerbate the inequalities that we see globally as well as in this country too?
Yeah, this is a really important subject. We've been talking about health disparities, cancer doc, in cancer for years. And there's a couple of issues that I think are important. One is an access issue. It's a structural issue. Yeah. And a trend that we have now for remote care, for digital health, for what we're calling decentralized approaches to care where you go to someone's home, that's going to help because it'll help in rural America. It'll help with some of the less accessible places in our big cities. But the other part of this is trust. And I think we saw, Deb, that there was a significant trust gap with many underserved communities and big government, big medicine, industry, et cetera, that really needs to be bridged. And one of our jobs moving forward, I think, is to rebuild that trust, that science and medicine and data can really do good in the world, that we have to engage, again, early and often, and try to find ways to incent the private sector to help us improve that access and rebuild that trust. And I think we can. There's a number of potentially novel ways to incent the private sector to do this, and I think the private sector writ large will help us get there. I'm very optimistic because of the trends I'm seeing in medicine right now, but we really have to have a sustained effort on this.
And Deb, on the global scale, the impression has been that it's the richer developed countries that were getting access to vaccines and treatment and so on, and the poorer countries simply weren't, that this was the way things were unfolding. Is that a fair description? And if so, how do we fix that for the next time?
Yeah, I think, and that's why I brought up that example of Kenya, and that's why deep granular data is important. You can't just, no business person would say, because I got to drive through Midland, Texas. I discovered so much of the United States being able to drive. I got to every state but 3, and well, I didn't get to Hawaii and Alaska. Other people got to go there, but that was too far for me to take that amount of time. But in driving the country, I got to drive through Midland. And no one that runs a business in Midland would say, in general, through all of my wells, I'm pumping X amount. They would know exactly what each well was producing. And that's the kind of granularity you need when you're dealing with pandemics if you want to change the course of that pandemic. You can't just go where the concentrations of people are. You have to go where people live. And I think where everyone lives. And you have to have a program that works for everyone. And I think that's what PEPFAR, and let's be clear, every infectious disease pandemic is political. Mm-hmm. They all have been political. It doesn't matter if it's Zika or Ebola or HIV, TB or malaria, they're political. The thing that data does, and granular data does, is it says to the ministry, you have residents in your country who can't access care. And then it becomes not perception-based, not risk-based, not finger-pointing-based. It just says, we have to do something different here. And then it means you have to move resources, or it means you have to change policies. When we started to really tackle the problem of HIV in young women, who were 10 times at risk of young men at the same age group to HIV, we had to address women's lives as a whole. And that's what we will take globally, is to address this equity issue, you have to address people's lives as a whole. And I think the other thing that the innovation that PEPFAR brought was this ability to have a waiver to allow the best drugs from our incredible pharmaceutical companies to immediately be handed off as a licensure to a generic company who produced them in high volume and at low cost. So my cost to treat someone in sub-Saharan Africa is about $105 a year. Here it's probably $15,000. And so, but it's the same drugs. Wow. And that's what PEPFAR did. It created, for resource-limited settings, an option. We could be doing that right now with vaccines and with the new therapeutics for COVID. Provide that waiver so that resource-limited settings has the access to what we have.
And Steve, can you talk a little more about the generic drugs? Because this also, as you just said, Debbie, it plays into the disparities that we see. Why do we not seem so efficient at that?
So again, and I was thinking the same thing, relating this to generic drugs when Deb was talking, because, and it was highlighted during COVID because the lack of data around our supply chain for pharmaceuticals, but for medical products in general, is substantial. And I'll just, a little anecdote, at the height of PPE shortages, et cetera, and certain drug shortages, we had people at the FDA calling other countries in the middle of the night, I mean, literally 24/7, to find out about where precursors of drugs and drugs were being manufactured, whether they were going to be released. And so there isn't really a central way to access data about the most essential medicines that we use. And that lack of data allows us to have some, confusion, et cetera, about access to these drugs. Now, with respect to generics, we all probably know that very important part of medical care in the U.S., a significant percentage of Americans are on generic drugs, and rightfully so. But 90% of those are manufactured overseas. And during COVID, there were export bans, as you might expect, because of national security concerns, et cetera. And so what that highlighted for us was a vulnerability. So, we have to really think about, number one, the supply chain, but number two, about some domestic manufacturing around essential medicines and essential products like personal protective equipment, et cetera, so that we ensure the next time something like this happens, that we have a ready supply and that we actually know where that supply is. And so I think there are certainly solutions to this, but it starts with the data, understanding where it is, and the transparency around it. During the height of the pandemic, we ran out of a sedative called propofol. So this is a drug that we use in medicine for people who are on ventilators so that they don't wake up.
I never let people know that.
What?
That we were running out of essential drugs.
All right, that didn't happen.
I didn't want to frighten anybody.
It was on TV, so,
We will edit the tape on
But
this.
it didn't get a lot of pickup.
No, and my point about it is that...
This is why we never slept.
We found a way to provide access from other countries that allowed us to address that shortage. But the other thing is there's advanced manufacturing techniques. There are machines, basically, that can manufacture enough propofol for an entire city for an entire year in 24 hours, basically, or something along those lines. My point is there are advanced techniques that we could put in this country right now that would allow us to address some of these issues.
And you heard that from the last panel.
Yeah.
About the vulnerability of our supply chain. Everything that you heard about, everything that you conceptually know about energy independence, take that to a concept of medical treatment independence. And we are about the 1960s of where our energy was. Of independence. So this is something that is absolutely critical, because I can't tell you what it was like to be sitting in task force and having our supply chain, and I just want to say they were amazing. They came from the Joint Chiefs. the Joint Chiefs gave us their best logistics people to save America. And when he comes in and says, we don't have any more, and you're just like, oh my God. I mean, everybody on a ventilator needs this. Right. Otherwise, they fight the ventilator. So it was critical to saving people's lives. So as much as our vulnerability was in the 70s to energy, that is where we exist right now in medicine and medicine treatments, medical therapies, the pharmaceutical precursors. That's where we are as a country. And I think, we have to take this very seriously.
And it's a solvable problem. I mean,
yes.
The solutions are out there, and we can leapfrog from being in the 60s to being in 2022.
That would be good. Vaccine diplomacy. I want to ask both of you about, is competition, say, with Russia and China, where both countries try to send the vaccines to other countries, particularly countries that we might not have at the top of our list, is that a healthy thing, or is that another sign of global competition? That's start with you, Deb, and then Steve, also with you. Your sense of the approval process here compared to the approval process in, say, Moscow and Beijing?
It's very interesting to me because the U.S. has been on the forefront of working with countries to save lives for now decades, building infrastructure through PEPFAR, saving babies and mothers and the parents and grandparents. So we had trusting relationships in these countries. But data and knowing before others leads other actors to be able to swoop in and say, we have something better, buy it from us. Now remember, we weren't asking people to buy it from us. We were, as a compassionate nation, saying we want to translate what we have to save other lives, and it just didn't result in surviving. Now these countries are thriving. I think we have to be cognizant of people using vaccines and health commodities in that manner, and in using it in a very different manner than the United States would ever use it, and to use it as actually, a marketing, and actually going in and saying, we'll build you a road, but it's going to cost you X. And so I think we have to be very aware of that. I think the countries are very aware of that. I think sometimes we're very quiet. We believe our action speaks louder than words, and that's true, they do. But sometimes people have to be reminded about the actions and reminded that PEPFAR has saved 20 million lives. I mean, we now have almost 19 million people on life-saving treatment because of a vision that President Bush had, and that for some reason he believed in us more than we believed in ourselves, and created a leadership role that says, I have your back. And you do what you need to do and work as hard as you can, and we'll get you what you need to be successful. And I think that's part of a great leader, is being to inspire people to be better than they think they are. And so I think countries understand that the United States has been standing beside them, and I think sometimes we need to remind people that we are there for their population, and we stand with their population for democracy, for access to health care, and ensure people can thrive. But I think in this moment, we should be doing that again. And I think a part of that is also transparency. I still don't have all of the data from any of the other vaccines produced by other countries. And I think without that level of transparency and data, we can't even recommend to countries whether this product works or not. And I think that put us in a very difficult position to not know whether the Russian vaccine or the Chinese vaccine was as effective as the vaccines that have been made in this country or made in Europe. And so I think that's a very difficult place that we were in, and there does need to be much more transparency. And I think the WHO needs to play a role in that. They need to, and again, it shouldn't be secret data. It shouldn't be only shown to the WHO or only shown by, it needs to be put in a public way, because that's how you rebuild trust, is making it very clear to people what things do.
Steve, how did you see it from your vantage point?
Well, first of all, we know we can do this. PEPFAR, 18.5 million people have received antiretroviral agents who otherwise wouldn't have received those probably without PEPFAR. So we know we can do this around the world, which is just terrific to know that we can. But Deb brings up a really good point about this, and that is the transparency we have, and you could argue it needs to be better around our system of medical product development, of course protecting confidential commercial information, but around the process that's used to develop. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but the press did a reasonable job of talking about what it was needed to develop a vaccine. And so the American people got an education about EUAs, randomized clinical trials, data safety monitoring boards. That education was really important, and that transparency was really important. We didn't necessarily see that around the world. And one of the things that I think, and there's a lot to criticize in terms of the slowness of the regulatory approach that we have. But one of the things that I think was really important was that transparency around this, and it did happen with speed. So I think more transparency around that is very necessary, knowing what the rules of the road are, but letting the American people see what it is, the process that we go through to actually make a decision about safety and efficacy. If that's there, they can make their own decision about whether they trust the decisions that we're making, and that's how it should work. And I think having a lot of public meetings around vaccine advisory committees, et cetera, helped to provide that trust. You saw the public trust in vaccines go up during that time. I'm not saying that was directly related to that per se, but the overall transparency, I do believe, helped with that. So I think the lack of transparency, and also about how those products were approved, but also about how they're working in the real world, that's problematic. And so we can't answer the question for you to compare and contrast. What I can tell you is, I dare say, there's been a medical product like our vaccines that are authorized right now in the US that have been given to more people over a shorter time around the world, and that I dare say no significant amount of data has been collected like it has for these medical products. And that is the sort of information that really helps us all make decisions about what we're going to do with our own personal health. We need more of that.
I think the other piece that people forget is Africa has a lot of vaccine right now. Mm-hmm. The problem is not vaccine. The problem is getting it distributed and into people's arms. And I think we have a little bit of that here in the United States, but that's why data is so important, is to understand who you've reached, who you haven't reached, why you haven't reached them, and what you're going to do to change it. Because I really don't like it when people just keep looking at data and say we have a problem and do nothing to create that solution. And I think what PEPFAR has demonstrated is you can address any problem if you allow yourself to move past your assumptions and your perceptions to the reality on the ground and really talk to people about what that barrier is and fix it. And I think that's what we're about, using data to fix the problem and fix what the issues are. And it's inexcusable right now that there's vaccines sitting in major capital cities in sub-Saharan Africa that hasn't been distributed.
We've only got a few minutes left, but let me ask each of you, do you feel confident from the experience we've just had with COVID, appreciating it's not completely over yet, that we are better prepared for the next global health crisis that is going to come sometime soon? Hopefully not soon, but at some point.
No.
The look on both of your faces was not terribly reassuring, I have to tell you.
Mine's going to be a no with a caveat, and that is that I maintain hope that we will. That, in medicine, there's this concept in quality called drift, where you sort of move away from the crisis and you move to normal times and you forget about how bad things were. We have to avoid that, our political leadership, but also the American people, the medical providers, et cetera, because forgetting what happened to us would be a huge mistake. And I think the trends of things in place like telemedicine, et cetera, are going to help expedite this. But I don't think that we're prepared. And we really, in the age of information, there's no reason why we can't monitor and predict what the next outbreak's going to be. Now, we're dependent upon cooperation among countries, et cetera, but we should be thinking about how we're going to build a health shield. And we need to extend this not just from infectious disease, but other chronic diseases. What are we doing to preempt diabetes, hypertension, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, cancer, et cetera? We really need to be thinking about this in a preemptive sense. And top of the list is infectious diseases. And, we keep talking about it. It starts with data. If we don't actually know what's going on in the infectious disease world and what's being isolated where, we're flying blind.
What I learned from PEPFAR and that execution on the ground was they were prepared with the platform needed in many ways to respond to their COVID pandemic. So imagine as a country if we didn't look at global pandemic preparedness as something that happens in the box over here, but we use that central box as we did with PEPFAR to tackle the pandemics of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, opioids. Person by person, community by community, county by county, use data to say this is where they're making great progress over here. What did they do? Right. How can we learn from that? Because that's how we did it in PEPFAR. This clinic's doing great. They're retaining men that are 25 years old. We're having real trouble with that, getting them to come back every 3 months. How are we going to do that? Finding those solutions and finding what works creates the system to ensure that you're ready for the next pandemic. If you look at this as a theoretic issue, it's something out there, and you don't use our main health system to tackle the pandemics we already have, and that's why I said no. So if we deal with rural health care, if we deal with our tribal nations, if we tackle the reality of our current pandemics, what you need to do at community level is no different in an infectious disease pandemic as what you need to do to deal with major health issues that this country is confronting.
Well, in wrapping up, I do want to mention one last thing, and that is Ukraine is a PEPFAR country.
Yes.
And you're wearing the colors
Yes.
of Ukraine. Steve and I are both wearing symbols on our lapels. So obviously we hope that Ukraine can get back to dealing with this crisis and not worry about the invasion coming from the north. Dr. Deborah Birx, Dr. Stephen Hahn, thanks so much for a fascinating conversation. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you much.
Hold on 1 second. This announcement is brought to you by, we're moving to the Hall of State for lunch, which is just out there. And then after lunch, please don't forget to come back for the keynote conversation with General Mattis. Thank you again.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Mr. President.